Game of Thrones, The Wrath of the Sleeping Dragon. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 751 Monster. Due to historical reasons, the closest city-states in Slavers Bay have had to consider the impact of the rebuilt Valyrian Empire on them. Because the Valyrian freehold once turned the ancient Gis Empire, which is now the land of Slavers Bay, into scorched earth. Meereen, Junfei and other places were once colonies of Valyria, just like the Summer Islands today. It is even said that a fleet full of Gifs has set off from Meereen and sailed to the far west, preparing to establish diplomatic relations with the Empire. And Asher also made a request in the letter. She wanted a woman. That was the beauty Brienne, who had a conflict and a fight with her in the tavern in King's Landing. Now Brienne of Tarth, Earl of Duskfall Hall, has graduated from the military academy and is serving in the Legion in the Riverlands. As a senior general in the Legion, she has 1,000 elite Imperial soldiers under her command. Asher wants Brienne to go to the Summer Islands to help her, and even promises to give her a high position and generous salary. Of course, Viserys would not force Brienne to do this. She still had to listen to Brienne's own opinion. If she wanted to go out into the world, she could go out and explore. If she wanted to stay at home, she would definitely be useful in the future. The army of the Empire has been expanding for several consecutive years to guard against enemies from the north. According to the data provided by the Old Town College, the last summer was from 289 to 292 Egan calendar, which was the year before the first year of the new calendar. Now from 293 to 299, it almost caught up with the 7 long summers of 223 to 230 Egan calendar. However, whether it was the previous request for award or the later request for people, it was not very important. Asher's main purpose in the letter was still placed at the end, which was why Viserys was silent for a long time. After reading the whole letter, "Did you bring it?" Then Viserys stood up from his chair and asked, "Yes, your majesty." When it came to such a thing, the bastards of the Iron Islands couldn't help but become nervous, because the main purpose of their trip was actually to escort it. Anyone can have problems, but it must not have problems. Because it is Lady Asher Greyjoy. No, now she should be called the Grand Duchess, and he is the Grand Duchess uncle, Victorian. However, Victorian has now completely transformed into a terrifying monster called the Deep One, and Viserys' eyes have become serious. Because he has personally experienced those terrifying demonized monsters, anything related to Valyria will arouse his vigilance, not to mention that he has seen this half-man, half-fish monster in Gillian's diary. Take me to sea. The box and carriage escorting Victorian were unloaded from the port and transported to King's Landing, but they were not able to enter the Red Keep. After all, such a large thing, which cannot be disassembled, the unsullied Commander Blackworm certainly cannot let it in. However, with the permission of His Majesty the Emperor, this specially made carriage in this mysterious big box can naturally enter the Red Keep. However, the commander of the Unsullied, Blackworm, had cold eyes and crossed his hands behind his back. He watched the carriage pass through the gate and drive into the Red Keep. Then he nodded to the soldier beside him and said concisely, "Follow." He was still a little worried about the big box, and the reason was naturally due to the noises coming from the big box from time to time. A living creature was locked inside? However, what kind of living creature could be locked in such a movable prisoner carriage? The outside was a wooden box with iron bars as thick as a baby's arm inside. What kind of thing needed such a box to be imprisoned? Fortunately, the royal family now lives in Highgarden all year round. The Red Keep has been vacant for 4 years as an Orthodox palace. Only Viserys would occasionally travel between the two places and stay overnight in the Red Keep. Even most of the time, the Imperial Council had to send a letter to Highgarden for instructions for any important decisions. Fortunately, the operation of the Empire has been on the right track now, and there are not many things that require the approval of the Emperor of the Empire before they can be implemented, so he has more free time. Soon, the wheels made a heavy sound, and the carriage drove into the Red Castle, and went straight to the most empty godswood in the back, and then stopped. Blackworm led a dozen unsullied soldiers to follow the carriage all the way, and the soldiers from the Summer Islands were responsible for escorting the big box. They carefully unloaded the box from the carriage. At this time, a woman in a red robe walked quickly through the corridor, but when she saw the big box, she suddenly stopped, and a pair of red eyes showed clear shock. This is the power of destruction. She was Melisande, the vice president of the seminary, and the leader of the Red God faith in Westeros. 4 years ago, the headquarters of the Red God sent the Red Monk Makoro across the ocean to King's Landing to guide the work. But unfortunately, after a palace fight, Makoro did not gain any upper hand. After all, Melisande was one of the first people to follow Viserys, and of course she would not be squeezed out so easily. Therefore, later, Makoro left King's Landing, and it is said that he went to the north alone, and then disappeared. And now Melisande felt the destruction in the darkness and destruction on the wall of the Red Temple of Volantis. What is going on? Have the demons in the underground world begun to revive? Melisande's face became uglier than ever. Now there is a powerful enemy at the end of the eternal ice field that has not been solved, but troubles are coming. Is this the rhythm of the end of the world? In fact, the underground demons have not been active very frequently in the thousands or even tens of thousands of years of human history, so many people don't know them at all. However, if you look at human history, you can see that the legend of the underground demons, like the White Walkers and the Long Night, exists in every corner of the world, such as the 14 Fire Fronts of Illyria, the Queen of Thunder Island, and the underground gods. Melisande stood in the corridor on the second floor and looked down for a few times. Her face suddenly changed, and then she gathered her sleeves and walked down quickly. On the other side, Viserys, his squire Robb Stark, and the bastards of the Iron Islands had also arrived here. Then Viserys nodded slightly and asked them to remove all the wooden boards outside the box. The soldiers looked at each other and then walked forward tremblingly. Chapter 2 Wait a minute. Chapter 752 Eastern World. As the wooden boards were removed, the sun tore through the darkness and shone through the iron bars. The crowd couldn't help but hold their breath. Viserys also squinted his eyes and stood in front of the iron cage, looking at the dying monster in front of him. It was more than 7 feet tall, or more than 2 meters tall, with scales all over its body and smooth and delicate skin, and a fin on its back. Its hands and feet had become sharp claws that could easily tear apart human armor, and its eyes had turned scarlet, with turbid pupils and a completely brutal look. Its mouth was full of sharp and tiny teeth, and it lay at the bottom of the iron cage, and a low voice continued to come out of its throat. Your Majesty, this is a demon from the underground. At this time, the Red Priestess Melisande came to Viserys at some point and spoke in a solemn voice. Although everyone avoided the iron cage, including the soldiers from the Summer Islands who escorted it, Melisande was not afraid. Instead, she came to Viserys. Yes, you know. Viserys heard Melisande's words and turned his head slightly to look at the Red Witch beside him. In fact, he had known that Melisande had come to him because no one could escape his perception. But he was more curious about what Melisande might know about this monster. However, Melisande did not rush to answer Viserys' question. Instead, she looked at the monster in the iron cage, then walked up slowly, came to the railing, and observed it carefully with a calm look. My lady, please be careful. The captain of the Storm Ridge, who was in charge of escorting it, warned nervously. He hid far away because he had fought this monster himself before. When Victarion suddenly went crazy on the battlefield, he slaughtered the native soldiers of Lotus Harbor and even attacked indiscriminately, causing the deaths of a large number of civilians. Although its actions indirectly helped Asha seize Lotus Harbor and become the queen of the Summer Islands, it also cost a great price to subdue it. Victarion evolved more thoroughly than Gillian at the beginning, because Gillian had been restraining himself, while Victarion took the initiative to immerse himself in the process of demonization after falling into a disadvantage on the battlefield, so he went on a killing spree. In the end, it cost more than 100 casualties to successfully capture this monster. It was an extremely tragic scene, and the bastards of the Iron Islands still remember it vividly. Yeah. However, Melisande only nodded slightly, but did not retreat. Instead, she carefully observed the other party. After a while, she turned her head and looked at Viserys, and her voice slowly opened. It looks like a magical creation, and it seems to come from the city of the dead Styre. Styre? Viserys showed a puzzled expression on his face, and Melisandre saw this puzzlement, and did not hide it. She nodded and explained. I come from Ashay, the shadowy city, your majesty. Styre, the city of the dead, is located in the heart of the shadow. It is also called the city of night. Except when the sun is shining brightly at noon, the city will not be illuminated by sunlight at other times. In the land of shadow, except Ashay, there are demons and monsters everywhere. Styre, even the top shadowbinders, wizards, or necromancers dare not travel through. Melisandre has been in the western world for so long that many people have forgotten her origins. She comes from the distant Ashay and is called the ominous person. Even the Dothraki will be terrified when they see Melisandre because they think that the Ashay people are all children of shadows. However, in fact, the Ashay people are not children of shadows because shadows cannot have children. The magical city of Shah, which is larger than Volantis, Karth, King's Landing and Old Town combined, has no children. It's dangerous, your majesty. Melisandre looked at Viserys, then turned her head and took another look at the monster that was probably dying because of not eating for a long time, then suddenly retracted her gaze and spoke in a firm voice. I suggest that it be executed immediately or exiled to the Shadowland. Ashay was surrounded by demons and was in danger at all times. However, more than a decade ago, at the end of the War of the Usurper in Westeros, the monsters in the Shadowland, the Grey Wasteland, and the Man-Eating Desert began to riot and constantly impacted the human world. The Golden Dynasty resisted the harassment of raiders from the Shadowland in the ancient capital of Ichi, and on the other side, tens of thousands of Golden Dynasty troops were stationed in the Long Five forts in the northeast of the Empire all year round to resist the monsters from the Grey Wasteland. The bloodless people in the bloodless cities, surrounded by the Grey Wasteland and the Man-Eating Desert, a necromancer who claimed to have lived for 1,000 years, and was the 69th emperor of a dynasty that had already perished, including the capital Carcosa he ruled, etc. The entire eastern world was looking for a way to save itself, and it was at that time that Melisandre followed the records in the ancient books and left Ashay by boat to find a way to save the world. She traveled through the Jade Sea, Karth, Gisca, and the Sea of Smoke and finally arrived in Volantis. Then she saw Viserys roasting dragon eggs in the fire of prophecy, and then she determined that the other party was the key to saving the world, and set off for Andalus. In fact, outsiders just don't understand, or just treat them as a legend, but the Easterners have been fighting these monsters for countless years. Melisandre came to the west to find the answer to the problem, but she didn't expect that these monsters, like the records of the Long Night all over the world, also appeared in the western world. Viserys was slightly silent after hearing Melisandre's suggestion. He had seen such demonized monsters in the ruins of Illyria. If the monsters in the Shadowland were the same as these monsters as Melisandre said, is it transformed by Victarion? The captain of the Stormridge nodded hurriedly. Open the cage. Viserys confirmed it again and nodded slightly, ordering them to open the cage that held the monster. Your Majesty. Everyone present had a change of expression on their faces, but Viserys had no intention of changing his mind, so they had to bite the bullet and step forward to open the cage that held the monster. Form a formation. The unsullied soldiers around were all ready to face the great enemy, raising their shields and spears to form a circle. However, Viserys stood in the center without moving, just quietly looking at the monster in the cage that looked like it was dying. Then it finally raised its head slowly, as if to confirm that the cage had been opened, and a pair of scalded eyes fell directly on Viserys, and then it suddenly pounced out. Your Majesty, be careful. The black bug raised its spear and tried to block Viserys, but Melisandre had already retreated behind Viserys without panic. But Viserys pushed the black bug away, and the monster rushed towards Viserys at an extremely fast speed. However, this seemingly harmless human was even faster, and directly reached out and grabbed the monster's throat. Boom. It fell heavily to the ground, and dust flew. Chapter 753 Awakening. The monster was attracted by the same breath as Viserys, and Viserys could also sense it. These black mist powers exist in the bottomless pits outside the wall, the ruins of Illyria, and even the Shadowlands and the Grey Wastes. It can turn all infected surface creatures into demons, controlling their forms and even their minds. The power possessed by Viserys is the same as these monsters, but for some reason, the black mist he absorbed and mastered did not transform him into a monster, and the black mist he sent out was the same. If these wild black mist powers are like unfiltered toxic and harmful water, then Viserys is like a purifier, and all the black mist that passes through his hands will be absorbed and utilized. Why? No one could explain to him. However, when he pinched the monster's throat and then fell directly to the ground, everyone present suddenly jumped. Only Melisandre remained calm. Especially the loyal unsullied commander who just wanted to block Viserys. Black Worm was pushed by Viserys and sat on the ground, and then in a flash he saw the Emperor throw the extremely fast monster to the ground with a very smooth movement, just like forging iron. Boom. In the open space in front of the Red Castle Godwood Forest, the floor was smashed and cracked, and the monster fell heavily to the ground and suddenly no longer looked like it had just attacked. It was just lying on the ground with its chest rising and falling and groaning. Viserys smashed this monster that was like a tiger descending from the mountain into a kitten. In addition, it had been hungry for a long time, and the soldiers escorting it did not dare to let it eat too much, so they only fed it a little bit of food every 10 days to ensure that it would not die. Therefore, it did not get up again after this fall. The monster lay on the ground and kept panting, and the tyranny and the look of destroying everything around him disappeared, and instead, it seemed to have regained a little calm. It was certainly not awakened by the beating, but the demonic energy in the monster was sucked out by Viserys. The soldiers of the Summer Islands and their captains looked at each other in bewilderment. It was not until then that they remembered that the man standing in front of them was the hero who saved all mankind many years ago and had faced the Night King alone. Wouldn't it be easy for such a man to deal with a small monster? He is worthy of being the emperor of the empire and the last hope of all mankind. The soldiers around were all deeply shocked and awed, but Viserys was calm. He stood in front of the monster's head, looking down at it calmly, and then asked, "Are you Victorian? Euron Greyjoy's third brother?" The monster lying on the ground, who was more than 2 meters tall, was panting slightly, with some confusion in his eyes, but when he heard the voice from above, he shuddered and woke up, and hurriedly climbed up from the ground. The unsullied soldiers around suddenly became nervous when they saw this scene, and they tightened their shields and spears in their hands. The crew members of the Stormbridge also drew their swords. As for Melisandre, she still stood behind Viserys, and her beautiful red eyes carefully stared at the monster in front of her, with a sense of inquiry in her eyes. It seemed that she wanted to burn the other party on the fire, to find out the truth. The eyes of the Red Witch made the monster's body tremble slightly, because it was completely awake at this moment, and all the memories of its drowsy time also emerged. This moment reminded it of some bad memories. The last person who turned into such a monster was put on the stake by the Red Monk and burned to death. Now this scene is so similar to the past, surrounded by people with swords drawn, and there is a Red Monk in front of it. But it has woken up after all, and just faced this silver-haired man without any power to fight back, so naturally it no longer thinks about breaking out. It hadn't figured out who Viserys was. After all, it had been locked in a box, and couldn't see or hear anything. It had been hungry for more than 10 days, and was thrown over its shoulder when it came out. But it only thought about Viserys' question for a second, and decided to answer honestly, because its instinct told it that the man in front of it was much stronger than him. "I am." Victarion's voice was hoarse, like the sound of a sword rubbing against the ground. Perhaps because he hadn't spoken for too long, his pronunciation had changed a little, but Viserys still understood it, and his eyes suddenly condensed slightly. Although these people had repeatedly emphasized and confirmed that this was the old Victarion of the Greyjoy family, seeing is believing, hearing is deceiving. The half-man, half-fish monster in front of him didn't look like a human being, but hearing the other party speak human language and admit his identity still made Viserys' heart tremble slightly. Can a person really become such a monster? However, thinking about the enemies in the northern icefield, who can make the dead get up and fight again, it seems that nothing is impossible in this world. How did you become like this? Although he had already heard these people's description, which was roughly about being attacked by the same monster, Victorian was injured, and then found that he was cursed and his body was slowly changing. But Viserys still wanted to hear Victorian's own words again. After Victorian finished explaining, Viserys fell into deep thought. He had hoped to get some useful information from Victorian, because he was the first person Viserys had met who could still regain consciousness, and perhaps his degree of demonization was not very deep. However, in fact, Victorian didn't know much. He was just a victim. "You are Viserys?" The half-merman monster in front of him, who was more than 2 meters tall, looked at Viserys, who was lost in thought, and was silent for a moment, then couldn't help asking. He thought he had come to Volantis, because only here were there a large number of red monks, unsullied warriors, and people with silver hair, which were extremely rare in Westeros. However, after Victorian observed the surrounding environment, he recognized that this was the Red Keep in King's Landing. Victorian had been to King's Landing when he was young. Although the Red Keep had changed a lot, he still recognized it. It was not until then that he realized the identity of the person in front of him, and could not help but speak to confirm. Chapter 754 Coban. This is the Emperor of the Empire. The commander of the Unsullied Legion on the other side reminded him coldly, holding a spear in his hand. Although there is no such strict etiquette between the monarch and his subjects here, it is also disrespectful to call the Emperor or King by his name. "Your Majesty." Victorian paused after hearing the words of the Black Worm, and then changed his title. His voice was low and a little more respectful. "Can you make me sober?" Victorian suppressed his inner excitement and asked. Because since he was infected with this mysterious curse, Victorian did not take it seriously at first, but later he began to despair. There is no way to reverse it, and there is no way to stop it. He can only watch his body change step by step, and slowly turn into a monster. Until finally, he completely lost his mind on the battlefield, and became a killing machine. However, Viserys changed all this, and restored his mind. Although it is impossible to turn back into a person, at least he is still himself, with his own consciousness, not a bloodthirsty monster. How can this not make Victorian excited? Viserys was originally in deep thought, but when he heard Victorian's words, he raised his head slightly, then his eyes flickered and he nodded. "Well, I can. But I still need your cooperation to do something." The most fundamental way for Viserys to solve the mystery of the Black Mist is to explore the ruins of Illyria again, or to walk into the bottomless pit that the old gods once suppressed outside the wall. However, now that the cold wind of winter is approaching, he has increasingly felt that the enemy in the north is about to accumulate its power and is ready to pour down again. Therefore, in addition to actively preparing for war, Viserys is now too busy to explore the ruins of Illyria, not to mention that this is a very risky behavior. Only he knows how dangerous it is inside. And in fact, the burden of resisting the invasion of the White Walkers is on Viserys' own shoulders. In other words, Viserys can abandon the empire he built and escape with his family, but the human world cannot lose him. If Viserys suddenly disappeared at this time, who knows what changes will happen to the whole world, because the Cold God has accumulated a huge force for this invasion, and is bound to defeat the resistance of mankind. As the last hope and light of all mankind, Viserys naturally cannot easily leave his position and wander around, so he can only put the key to breaking the situation on Victorian. "I hope to find a breakthrough from his body." Viserys pondered for a long time, and then finally spoke. "Bring Qyburn here." In the Red Castle, that afternoon, a needle as thick as a baby's arm, the thin needle drilled into Victorian's body, and then a tube of dark liquid was drawn out. This is Victorian's blood, which may be a little reddish in the sunset, but it is deep in the room without direct light. "Your Majesty, I have extracted some of Lord Victorian's blood and other characteristics." The grey-haired old scholar held several sealed bottles of blood and mucus and scales from the mermaid monster in his hands, while Victorian looked at the old man with a slightly unfriendly expression. Because the eagerness in the other party's eyes just now made Victorian, a straight man, a little bit unbearable. Qyburn looked at him, as if he was looking at a peerless beauty or a rare treasure. "But, I'm afraid I still need some necessary materials, Your Majesty." After extracting the blood and some necessary characteristics of the mermaid monster, Kaiban handed it to his assistant, a deaf-mute child who could not speak and could only use sign language. However, Kaiban did not leave in a hurry, but continued to ask. The materials that Kaiban needed were known to quite a few people in the black market of King's Landing, because he often came here to purchase goods. There were even rumors that people had heard about a mad scholar who would do something to corpses, so they asked the Iron Throne and the church to punish this person, and even held protest rallies, but in the end, nothing came of it. However, this experiment was unusual, and Kaiban might need more than just corpses. Viserys was silent for a moment after hearing this, and then waved his hand to let Kaiban go to the prison to bring out some death row prisoners. For this real world, death row prisoners really have no human rights. After all, they have committed unforgivable crimes, and even passed through layers of approval until the Empire's Minister of Justice personally approved that they were not allowed to wear black clothes, and were executed immediately. When Kaiban saw Viserys nod in agreement, a happy expression suddenly appeared on his wrinkled cheeks. Living experiments have always been a taboo that must not be touched in the human civilization world. Viserys had previously strictly prohibited Kaiban from engaging in this research, especially not killing innocent people indiscriminately, but death row prisoners who committed serious crimes were not included in this list. Your Majesty. Then the grey-haired, slightly hunched, wrinkled old scholar bowed slightly and saluted, and then withdrew with his assistant. No one wanted to get close to someone like Kaiban. Even his fellow senior Dr. Ambrose didn't like him. However, with Viserys' permission, Kaiban still had a place in the Imperial Medical School, an independent laboratory with complete equipment and no shortage of funds, where he usually conducted research on medicine, human body, and magic alone. Because of the influence of Dr. Marwyn, Kaiban only had respect for the magician Dr. Marwyn and the entire city, so he also knew a little about necromancy and was considered an all-round scientific research talent who took the dark route. And this deaf and mute assistant was picked up by Kaiban at the entrance of a poor alley when he went out to pick up goods. He was abandoned by his biological parents, so Kaiban adopted him and raised him until today and taught him knowledge related to medicine and magic and let him be his assistant. Viserys wanted to solve the mystery of the Black Mist. Now that he was unable to do anything, it was crucial to solve the secret of Victarion. If possible, he even wanted to return to the ruins of Illyria to catch a few monsters for a search. However, considering the danger and uncertainty of this matter, Viserys finally gave up, but he didn't expect it to come to his door again. Asher Greyjoy did not live up to his expectations and gave himself a big gift. Kaiban extracted Victarion's blood, saliva and other necessary materials. The next major research breakthrough direction is to start from how he was infected and how he became such a monster. Can such a monster be artificially created? If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 755 Giant Prince. A piece of good news came from the royal forest outside King's Landing. After being pregnant for 36 months, the giant queen Eda Marshend Doranelli successfully gave birth to a giant prince. His father, the giant king Magmas Tundo Dolweeg, kept guarding his son day and night, fearing that he would be harmed in any way. Even the dragons who also lived in the royal forest were not allowed to get close. Of course, Mag was not afraid that the dragons would hurt his son. After all, they had lived together for so many years, but he was afraid that these big guys would accidentally step on him to death. This was the last seed of the giants. Except for the 3 adult dragons who were not interested, the 5 young dragons all gathered around. They curiously poked their heads out from a distance to watch. They were very interested in how humans gave birth to children. Although giants were not humans, the dragons could not distinguish them clearly. In their eyes, giants were just tall little guys. Utanagan. The giant king's voice rumbled, because the girls of the children of the forest also gathered around. However, these little guys in the eyes of the giants were not threatening at all, and they were kind-hearted. Mag let them approach without worry. In the ancient language of the giants, Utanagan means squirrel people. The dragons are bred with dragon eggs, and the breeding method of the children of the forest is also very mysterious. According to legend, the fishbeam wood is their mother. The forest girl Snowhair is also curious about the birth of life, and Leaf has peeped at the reproduction of humans. When she traveled to Westeros, they use the power of magic to sing collectively, to bless the little wild prince. The birth of giants has become the biggest thing among the neighbors living in the royal forest. When the children of the forest were singing, a black fog suddenly spread not far from here. Haboom! Mag, the giant king, was instantly as if he was facing a great enemy. He held a big tree in his hand and looked over, and the muscles of his arms were tense. Then he saw the black fog spreading, and a figure wearing a gorgeous golden robe walked out of it, and the spreading black fog was then all absorbed into his body. It's you, Viserys. The giant king heaved a sigh of relief after seeing the appearance of the newcomer and put down his weapon. Well, congratulations, Mag. I heard that Edda gave birth to a child, so I came to see. Viserys walked out of the black fog and spoke calmly. He spoke the ancient language, the language that the ancestors and giants once spoke. Because of his outstanding learning talent, Viserys' knowledge was actually the most overlooked by others. The knowledge in his head was no less than that of a doctor in the Citadel. Most of the books he had read were memorized. He now mastered many languages, including the common language of Westeros, various Valyrian languages, the ancient language of the First Men, the source language of the children of the forest, Dothraki, and so on. Thank you. The giant king Mag nodded slightly after hearing Viserys' words, then stepped out of the way with heavy steps, turned around and looked at his wife and children. At this moment, his queen, gentle Adda, was feeding their children without any hesitation, with her breasts exposed. Giants don't wear clothes, and they don't care about shame like humans, while the girls of the children of the forest were half kneeling on the ground and still singing softly. Viserys' pair of lavender eyes flickered slightly, and he could clearly see the rhythm of magic in the forest trembling. The magic of the children of the forest has become more and more powerful, even to the point where it can be seen by the naked eye. This may also be related to the fact that the magic tide of the whole world is constantly returning. The children of the forest, a race that has already entered the sunset, has gradually recovered its second spring. Then, when the girls of the children of the forest finished singing, Leaf and Snowhair stood up from the ground and greeted Viserys. Viserys, you are here. Leaf was very happy to see Viserys, and stretched out her three-fingered claws to shake hands with Viserys. This is the etiquette she learned from the human world. Leaf's personality is very lively and full of yearning for the outside world, while Zuffa is a shy girl. Even though she has lived in the royal forest for so many years, she is still a little afraid when she sees Viserys. She blinked slightly, and did not speak. I'll come and see him. Viserys nodded slightly. At this moment, the little giant prince had finished drinking milk and fell asleep. His mother Adda was not afraid when she saw Viserys, but held her child in her palm and handed it over. Viserys would certainly not hurt their children, otherwise he would not give them a piece of soil suitable for living and survival. She and her husband lived in the royal forest without human disturbance and could enjoy themselves. Giants are just a kind of humanoid creatures, not humans, but in fact, humans are the same. Only when they feel safe, and without anxiety, will they choose to get pregnant, and give birth to their offspring. Adda will get pregnant, and give birth to a child, which means that the life in the royal forest really makes them feel at ease. And Viserys reached out, and took the little giant prince from the giantess Adda. In fact, giants are not so ugly when they are young. They don't have so much body hair. They just have a flat face, and an exaggerated chest to abdomen ratio. The rest is similar to that of a human child. Giants are not much bigger than humans when they are just born. What's his name? In the lush woods, the giants built a simple giant wooden house by themselves. The sunlight above their heads shone on the ground. Viserys held the little life in his arms, his lavender eyes sparkling, and then asked, "No name yet?" The father of the little giant, Mag, said in a rumbling voice, "I don't have much knowledge. I want you to give him a name." Viserys, the giant king, came to the human world and his horizons were broadened a lot. He learned that there were many tools that could be used, and the knowledge that humans were rich in. Therefore, the giants who never built houses also began to build a wooden house on their own initiative. They never wore clothes and also had a set of armor customized for them by Viserys. However, his brain was not smart and he couldn't learn these complicated things. He just put his hope on his children. He had wanted Viserys to help him pick a name for the child when Ada was pregnant, but he didn't expect Viserys to come by himself. A name? Viserys held the little life in his arms, his gorgeous robe hanging on the ground, thought for a moment and then spoke. Artis. Chapter 756, Hroth Targaryen. During the Age of Heroes, there was a legendary leader named Attis. Although he was a human, he was able to live in harmony with all creatures. Attis was friends with giants and mermen. He rode a majestic falcon and eventually married a child of the forest. I've heard of this name. Leaf on the other side heard the name Viserys gave to the little giant prince and quickly answered with her little paws. He seems to be called Wind Knight. His wife was a singer, but she died of dystocia. Because there were not many children of the forest who chose to marry humans, the wife of this legendary leader was also very famous among the children of the forest. The current giant King Mag heard the name Viserys gave him, and then carefully took his son from his hands. The future giant King Attis? Then Mag lifted him up high, facing the sunlight from the dense woods of the royal forest. The little giant prince curled up in his father's palm, still sleeping soundly. He even smacked his lips and licked the milk on his lips. Okay, then my son will be called Attis, the giant King Mag said in a rumbling voice. It can be heard that there is a lot of joy in his voice, but it woke up little Attis. The giant prince's mother snatched her son and looked at her husband with a reproachful look. Mag later made a request to Viserys. He hoped that his son could grow up with Viserys' son, become his partner and friend, and receive human education from an early age. The giant race is close to extinction. The last giants have died in the war with humans and the White Walkers. He doesn't know if there are other people in the world besides him and Ida. However, little Attis is destined to learn nothing by following him. Perhaps he will be confused in the end and then go to the extinction of the race. Therefore, although the IQ of the giant King Mag is not high, he can still understand the general trend. Now it has reached a situation where there is no way to break or build. If there is no change, the race will be extinct, so changes must be made. If his son could grow up with Viserys' son and become his partner, he would definitely have a better future than with his father. Maybe he could also seize power, find other tribesmen, and revive the giant race. The request of the giant King Mag was not very outrageous, and it would also be helpful for Viserys' son to have such a partner. Viserys thought for a moment, then nodded in agreement. Okay. 4 years ago, Viserys moved the royal family to Highgarden, and then married the eldest princess of the empire, Rhaenys, there in a low-key manner. Then Rhaenys became pregnant with their child, and after 10 months of pregnancy, she gave him a son as she wished. The first heir to the empire also has the right to inherit Dawn. The whole King's Landing cheered for him on the day he was born, because he was the only male heir to the great empire that spanned both sides of the narrow sea and united Andalus, Pentis and the kingdom of the three daughters. And there is a great possibility that he will be the second supreme emperor of the empire. Of course, it is not certain. And his name is Heroes. Heroes Targaryen. This was Viserys' idea. He told Rhaenys that Heroes was the name of the sun god in a civilization she didn't know about. Viserys named his son Heroes, which implied Viserys' implication, hoping that his son could become the rising sun, and also meant to appease the Martell family. After all, Rhaenys also had Dornish blood, and the family emblem of the Martell family was the sun. The little giant Prince Artis was about the same age as Heroes. Heroes had just passed his third name day. I believe that with the blood of the giant, Attis should soon be able to surpass Heroes. Viserys nodded in agreement, and the purpose of his trip here was not just to see the little giant prince, but more because he had some doubts in his heart, and hoped to ask them for advice. Leaf, what do you think of the world now? The forest child girl didn't understand Viserys' question, and a slightly puzzled expression appeared on her face. But she didn't want Viserys to think that he was a fool who didn't even understand the question, so the girl could only think about it according to her own understanding, and then stammered. I think this world is both fair and cruel. Both fair and cruel. Yes, I think this world is fair, For example, before the first men came to the land you call Westeros, it was our home. But in those days, our numbers were also few. Because the gods gave us long life, but not many, so that we would not fill the world, just like deer fill the forest without wolves to hunt them. But that was in the dawn, when our sun was rising, and now the sunset is setting. This is our decline. The giants are almost extinct. They were both our scourge and our brothers. When saying this, Leaf looked up at the giants, and the giant King Mag was a little confused. Because Viserys and Leaf were talking in the original language of the children of the forest, which was also taught by the girl to Viserys. The giant lions of the West Mountain have been slaughtered, the unicorns have almost disappeared, and there may be very few mammoths left now. The dire wolves may exist longer than us, but their doom will also come. Because you humans are too powerful. At this point, Yeezy's voice was a little dry, like a flower that had lost its moisture and drooped its head. You are too powerful. In the world you created, there is no room for them or us. Viserys fell silent after hearing Yeezy's words. Because of the pressure and various threats including the White Walkers, he had the intention to put some ideas in his mind into reality. For example, launching a series of productivity revolutions, grasping the power of the flames, taking a shortcut that has been proven, and allowing human civilization to leap quickly. Although he is not an expert in these, he will not worry about failure forever if he invests a lot of money in research with the right direction. I understand. Then Viserys reached out and rubbed the girl's furry head and then stood up. Thank you, Yeezy. The girl Yeezy covered her head, and before she could react, she saw the silver-haired man in front of her suddenly turned into a ball of black mist and disappeared without a trace. Chapter 757 Black Death. Faced with the danger getting closer and closer, Viserys did not choose to sit and wait for death. First, he wanted Qyburn to continue studying the changes in Victorian, and then find a breakthrough to unlock the secret of his transformation from a human to this monster, and finally hold this secret in his hands. After all, he can make an ordinary human evolve into a mermaid monster with extremely fast speed and infinite strength. If he has such a monster army, the result must be chilling. Secondly, he had an idea many years ago, and wanted to put it into reality, that is, to visit the old monk on the Novice Sinner's Ladder. The other party is a verifiable extraordinary person with certain prophetic abilities. His status in the SS continent is transcendent. Although few people know about it, just like the Green Prophet in Westeros, Viserys expects to get some warnings in the conversation with the other party. Viserys arranged what to do after he left King's Landing, but in fact there was nothing to arrange. The founding emperor of the Valyrian Empire seemed to have the sequel of Aegon's conquest of Westeros. He was so lonely when he was invincible, so he rode his dragon to travel around the world. However, Viserys did not travel much, and his sequel mainly consisted of not going home. The royal family has been collectively moved to Highgarden for 4 years, and there is no sign of returning to King's Landing. At first, the officials of King's Landing thought that it was the air problem in the city that drove away the noble imperial royal family. However, the sewer problem was later solved, but they still had no intention of returning. Now, only Viserys, the little queen riding a dragon, and Princess Dina is occasionally staying King's Landing temporarily, and few royal children come here at other times. Oh, of course Prince Aegon is not counted among them. Because since Prince Aegon decided to voluntarily throw himself into the arms of the 7 gods, he has tacitly given up his surname, just like Maester Aemon, the son of Mikarai, the greatest Maester of the Targaryen family, who threw himself into responsibility and gave up his surname, status, and bloodline. Septon Aegon has now grown up and become one of the most talented monks in the entire Great Septon of St. Bela. Because he is the disciple of the current High Septon, and with his extraordinary background, if nothing unexpected happens, he can almost be confirmed as the candidate for the next High Septon, and he also has a bright future. Viserys took his old friend Balerion and flew to Norvis in the sunset. On the wall of King's Landing, Minister of Intelligence Varys and Minister of Finance Illyrio were standing here, facing the sea, watching the figure with huge wings gradually turned into a black dot, and finally disappeared at the intersection of the sea and the sky. Then Varys shrugged his shoulders slightly, and spoke in a feminine voice. Conspiracy and trickery, sin and ugliness. Once this was the unchanging theme of this city, but now it seems to have failed. King's Landing is no longer full of these shameful things, because blood and fire, fire is power, and dragons can spit fire. Under its majestic gaze, everything in King's Landing is visible. All the conspiracies and intrigues are not as thorough as a breath of dragon flame, especially Viserys. Although he may make mistakes, his mind is not stupid. On the contrary, he has remained clear from beginning to end. When you have absolute power and authority, conspiracies and intrigues become the most shameless things. Varys was originally a master of this, but now he feels at a loss, especially when the word loyalty always appears in his heart. He becomes more cautious, trembling and treading on thin ice, because only Varys himself knows that he has never been loyal to anyone, whether it is Aerys second, Robert, or this friend beside him. But unfortunately Illyrio did not listen to the words of his old friend. Have you forgotten our original dream? Varys, the man from Pentos with a yellow, forked beard, said displeased. Have you forgotten? Illyrio took a deep breath when he said this. Although he could confirm that the great emperor of the empire had left on a dragon, he could not help but feel fear when he thought of his actions in recent years. The word came to his lips, and he turned his head left and right to look, and swallowed them back. However, Varys also glanced at him, and seemed to be startled, and anger rose in his heart. He did not continue to pay attention to him, but put his hands in his sleeves and hurried away. Viserys rode the dragon, and left King's Landing. The size of the black dragon Balerion has changed significantly over the years. Although he has passed the earliest rapid growth period, like a human child, he grows and develops very fast. But once he reaches adulthood or passes the development period, he will stagnate, and will not grow again in this life. But the difference between dragons and humans is that dragons have a longer lifespan, and their adulthood is not as long as that of humans. Generally, they have to wait until they are 16 years old. A dragon can grow from a young dragon to an adult dragon in less than 10 years. Even if they become adult dragons, their bodies will not stop growing, but the speed will slow down a lot. They will grow all the time, and will never stop until the day they die. The scales covering their huge bodies will become rougher and tougher with age. The older the dragon is, the thicker its scales are. Even a high explosive crossbow cannot penetrate the scales of an adult dragon at a long distance. The dragons at this stage have truly grown into the sky overlords. They have no natural enemies and no threats. The temperature of the flames spewed by the dragons also rises sharply, which can melt stubborn stones, and the color will change accordingly. The dragon flames spewed by the dragons are mostly orange-yellow in the early stage, and until the adolescence, the color of the adult will change with the body color. For example, the dragon flames spewed by Balerion have reached a deep purple, almost completely evolving into the Black Death. Its brother Regal spews green dragon flames, and Viserion spews platinum dragon flames. If these dragon flames are combined with magic, they may be able to build blackstone buildings, because they have reached the corresponding temperature, but there is no corresponding method, and Viserys has not tried it yet. At this moment, the sunset in the distance gradually falls into the sea level. The black dragon Balerion spreads his wings and flies over the boundless sea. There are endless ships crossing the narrow sea. The crew on the ship looked up and saw the giant dragon in the sky and couldn't help but sigh. Then they heard the roar of the giant dragon in the sky, which spread far away with the sea breeze. Chapter 758 Norfus. The distance from King's Landing to Norfus is far, and it may take several months to travel normally, but for the dragon, this distance is not a problem. It took Viserys only a few days to fly from King's Landing to Norfus. During this time, he also stayed in Pentos for a while, to reminisce with his old friends. But even so, Viserys rode a dragon across the narrow sea to Norfus, which was also faster than the flight of ravens. However, when he arrived here, Viserys found that this monk city in the mountains seemed to be holding a grand funeral. The magnificent buildings in the upper city were hung with white banners everywhere, and there was a huge mourning tent that could be seen from the sky. However, when the dragon circled in the sky of Norfus, everyone in Norfus was panicked. Oh my god. It's a dragon. It's a dragon. Because it is hard not to remind the people of Norfus of the period hundreds of years ago, when they were controlled and dominated by the Valyrian freehold. Although Norvus, like Laurus and Koha, was founded by Valyrian religious dissidents, according to legend, a bearded monk who believed in the secret gods was dissatisfied with Valyria's free and relaxed belief system, so he led the followers of the secret sect to leave the long summer land and settle in Norvus. They built fortresses and temples here and bought autonomy from the freehold. As its vassal, they paid tribute year after year, but were protected by the freehold. Later, in the war, when the Andals invaded Norvus, Valyria sent hundreds of dragons in one breath, instantly destroying King Cologne and his battle-hardened Andal army, saving Norvus from being conquered. However, it was this war that led to the rooting of the fear of dragons in Valyria in the hearts of the Norvus people. Today, Valyria has revived in the west, and it was established by their neighbor at the beginning. In recent years, the empire has been expanding its territory, annexing the Lies and Tirosh. All of this has made the Norvus people panic, fearing that one day, when there are more than 100,000 troops, 8 dragons will suddenly descend upon them, repeating the scene of the Andal army being reduced to ashes outside the city of Norvus. Therefore, when the Black Death Balerion suddenly appeared in the sky of Norvus and roared, many Norvus people and bearded monks were all as if they were facing a great enemy, and the whole city was shaking in the roar of the dragon. Dong 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 dong. However, at this moment, the 3 ancient bells of Norvus, Num, Nera, and Ni, all rang at the same time. When these 3 ancient bells, which were called one of the 9 man-made wonders of the world by Longlegs Lomas, rang, the whole city could hear them. Because these bells will tell every Norvus person what to do now, including getting up, sleeping, working, resting, fighting, praying, and even when to have sex. Gather. Quick, quick, quick. Prepare to defend against the enemy. The soldiers of the Holy Guard holding long axes began to gather, and the city-states in the mountains and hills were in chaos. Norvus also had a governor's council, but it was just a formality, because all governors were chosen by God through monks, without any rules. Some were of noble birth, and some were of ordinary birth. What should we do? A dozen bearded monks stood in front of the ancient temple, somewhat at a loss, because they didn't know how to deal with the dragon. Their secret god didn't tell them, but only told them to influence the enemy with kindness. However, at this moment, the black dragon above their heads suddenly let out a deafening roar, and the whole city-state trembled again. All the holy guards holding long axes rolled their throats, and their palms were full of sweat. At the same time, a cloud of black mist suddenly appeared in front of the 12 bearded monk governors. Then a young man wearing a black cloak and silver gold long hair shawl walked out. Good day, everyone. The dissipated black mist retracted into the black cloak again. You are. The bearded monk governor of Norvus showed a look of shock on his face, because this was a miracle and magic. An old monk with a face full of magic and a grey beard couldn't help but speak with respect, and then asked. In fact, Viserys no longer needed to prove his identity. But after all, he came here to ask for help. But when he explained his identity, he got an answer that he didn't expect. He's dead. Just a few days ago. It was unknown how many years this old monk had lived, including the 12 monk governors selected by the secret gods present. Because many of them were not from aristocratic families, they only knew that since their grandfathers, there was an old monk with high morals and prestige in the ancient temple on the stairs of sinners. He was the core of the entire secret sect, but they didn't even know his name and title. However, he had died suddenly of illness a few days ago. It happened so suddenly that no one could have expected it in advance. Because no one often came to disturb him, his body had already smelt when he was found. But it was normal for such an old man. Is he sick? Dead? Viserys was a little confused when he heard the answer, and his brows slightly frowned. He didn't expect it to be such a coincidence that the prophet of Essos suddenly died a few days before he came to Norvus. Then Viserys was silent for a long time, and the 12 bearded monk governors in front of him also looked uneasy. After all, the man in front of them might be the most terrible person in the world. What's more, there was a magical performance just now that shocked the bearded monks present. The dragon was right above their heads, and they didn't dare to have any bad intentions. Can I see him? Viserys, who was silent for a long time, suddenly asked. Of course. His death is a huge loss to the entire secret sect, and we are all very sad. The monk with grey hair and beard, who was still in the lead, took the initiative to stand up and bowed slightly, then led visitors to the burial place of the old monk. The funeral was held for several days, and now his body is still in the coffin and has not been buried. When visitors came to this magnificent mourning hall, the monks present were all terrified and looked at visitors with uneasy eyes. It was obvious that the scene of the giant dragon circling and roaring in the sky just now scared many people present. They all thought that the Valyrian Empire was going to take action against the pure land of Norvus. However, when they saw that only visitors came here, they couldn't help but move their expressions slightly, and many thoughts arose in their hearts. However, the 12 monk governors did not express anything, except for the old monk, who led the way in front. The others followed behind obediently, so they gave up the idea. He is resting here now. Then the old monk, who led the way in front, turned around and said. Viserys did not speak, but just nodded slightly, walked forward and looked up and down at the coffin in front of him, then reached out and grabbed the coffin lid and opened it directly. Chapter 759 Koha. Viserys' action was very sudden, and he directly flipped over the lid of the pitch black coffin, and none of the bearded monks present reacted. Dear guest, you. The face of the old monk headed by the 12 monk governors suddenly changed, and everyone present was in an uproar. Viserys' action was a very rude behavior. Even though he was of noble status and came riding a dragon, it was unacceptable to open the coffin in someone else's mourning hall. However, before these bearded monks could accuse Viserys of being rude, when they saw the scene in the coffin, everyone's face changed. Because the pitch black coffin was empty at the moment, and the body disappeared without a trace. What happened? Where did the body go? The monk governor was furious, and then questioned the slave soldiers on the scene, but the soldiers present were all at a loss. Because the memorial ceremony had lasted for 3 days and 3 nights, there were people guarding here day and night, and it was impossible for someone to steal the body with so many people paying attention. However, the scene was now in chaos, with people whispering and talking about it. Viserys' behavior became a revelation of the truth. I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Please move aside for a moment. We will thoroughly investigate the whereabouts of the body. We have prepared a grand banquet for you. At this time, a long-haired and long-bearded monk governor came over, bowed slightly, and then spoke. Not everyone in Norvus is qualified to grow a beard. Only orthodox monks can do so. Other men, regardless of their origin, generally grow long beards and do not trim them. Women and slaves are not allowed to have any hair on their bodies, and their hair must be shaved. Some Norvus women of noble birth will wear wigs. However, Viserys' trip was to find the old monk from Norvus who had the power of prophecy, and he had no interest in attending any banquet. Whether the other party was really dead or didn't want to see him and hid, Viserys had no way. After all, the other party had a stronger power of prophecy than him, especially on the continent of Essos. Viserys absorbed the power of the old gods and used it more in Westeros. No need. The silver-haired young man in a black cloak said calmly. This calmness was interpreted as coldness by the other party, and he secretly complained in his heart. If you offend the Emperor of the Valyrian Empire, what good life will you have in the future? After all, the other party only needs to move his fingers to send out 100,000 troops to destroy the small city-state of Norvus. And after all, he just said that the person was dead, but the body disappeared, which really makes people suspect that he was faking his death. In fact, the top leaders of Norvus knew that the old monk had the ability to predict. The incident of the Red God believers seizing power in Koha a few years ago was also supposed to happen in Norvus. Because although the bearded monk system of Norvus seems to be impregnable now, only the people inside know that there are also many dissatisfactions brewing in the lower city of Norvus. Because the bearded monks are only a minority in this city, and the vast majority of people in Norvus are ordinary people who are not qualified to become monks, or even slaves. Many places in the free trade cities are using slavery, relying on worthless slaves to guard the city. Norvus is the same. Their holy guards are all bald slaves. Because in Norvus, women and slaves are not qualified to grow hair. And the faith of the Red God Cultura happens to be the easiest to incite these poor people and slaves. Therefore, many years ago, a conflict broke out in Koha between the Red God cult followers and the traditional nobles and the Black Goat God followers. The Red God cult followers burned the statue of the Black Goat God, captured the governor's council, and massacred many of Koha's great families. Just like when Viserys and the Windblown of the Tattered Prince captured Pentus, Koha's aristocratic families were almost wiped out, and the rest fled. 3 years ago, Koha was completely controlled by the cult of Vrila, and the Black Goat God faith was driven out of Koha, wandering in other trading cities, and even came to the territory of the Empire. However, the belief in the Black Goat God is quite bloody, often requiring the sacrifice of livestock, even the lives of criminals. When necessary, the nobles of Koha will offer their own flesh and blood to the Black Goat God. Many years ago, when the Red God believers secretly planned a riot, the nobles in the city adopted this most extreme method in the hope of obtaining the blessing of the Black Goat God. Unfortunately, the Black Goat God did not show his divine power to save the lives of his believers. In the end, the Red God believers won the war and seized control of the city of Koha, making the city a place that completely believed in the Red God. Norvus would have suffered the same fate. The bottom of Norvus was also under currents. Many of the lower class people and slave soldiers living in the lower city were bewitched by the Red Monks and were ready to launch an uprising with the believers of Koha. But the old monk on the sinner's ladder successfully predicted the occurrence of this scene and gave an early warning. Norvus drove away all the Red Monks and hunted down all the lower class people and slave soldiers who were ready to participate, and then let this uprising die in the womb. Is he really faking his death? The monk governor complained in his heart, but Viserys ignored him and was not in the mood to stay here any longer. Instead, he took a step and turned into a ball of black mist and disappeared in front of everyone. Viserys found his dragon again. In fact, it did not like the world constructed by humans. Instead, it preferred to stay in the deep mountains and forests. Norvus is such a city. There are strong winds all year round and the city is surrounded by mountains. When Viserys was a guest in Norvus, Balerion flew to a hill outside the city to rest for a while. There were dense black forests, beech, oak, pine and a large number of different wild animals, such as wild boars, brown bears, wolves or other prey. Balerion killed a brown bear and roasted it with dragon flames to fill his teeth. Now Viserys can use the black mist to transfer a distance of more than 10 miles, enough to cover a city, so it would not take much effort for him to find Balerion. However, when Viserys found Balerion, his brows slightly furrowed, because he sensed a familiar feeling here. Then he carefully identified it, and then cast his eyes to the northwest outside the city of Norvus. Chapter 760, Gate of Hell. Viserys was inspired by something inexplicably familiar, and rode his dragon to a place 100 leagues northwest of Norvus, and then landed from the sky. This place is close to the Bay of Loras, but it is still surrounded by the mountains of the Norvus Mountains. This is a valley with dense forests and few people. The huge black dragon passed by, scaring the beasts on the ground to flee in all directions, as if the world was about to end. Then Balerion fell from midair. Here, Viserys frowned slightly as he looked at the scenery in front of him. This place is located in the Norvus Mountains, but it is quite far away from the city-state of Norvus. However, Viserys could feel the call from this place from a distance, and when he flew over on his dragon, he could see it at a glance from a distance. The reason is simple. Because the landform features here are too conspicuous. This is a huge cenote, with a deep hole that looks like an abyss. Especially when you look down from the sky and face the whole of this cenote, you will feel creepy. Even Viserys is not immune to this. When he looked directly at the abyss, it seemed as if the abyss was also looking directly at him. However, when Viserys fell from the sky and stood on the edge of the cenote and looked down, he could find that there were many densely packed caves under the cenote. This stunning natural landscape is certainly not unknown. This is definitely the largest cenote Viserys has ever seen, even larger than the remains of the 14 fire fronts that he had a glimpse of in the ruins of Valyria. And because Viserys has a photographic memory, he can remember many books in his mind after reading them once, so he only thought for a moment and remembered where this place was. It's still Longlegs Lomas. I don't know how many places this guy has traveled to in his life. Viserys thought. Lomas traveled around the world and wrote 2 famous books, one called Wonder and the other called Man-Made Wonders. Because these 2 books are so famous, they are one of the enlightenment books for many Westeros noble children. directly helping children to shape their first impression of the entire vast world. The gods created 7 wonders, but humans created 9. This is the most famous sentence Lomas said. The 7 wonders created by the gods are only natural landscapes, while humans create man-made architectural wonders. The cemetery in Norvis is one of the 7 wonders created by the gods. Here is the rarest cave system in the world. The cemetery is steep and bottomless. No one can reach the bottom of this cemetery. People say this is the entrance to the underworld. Viserys is still very fond of the Tabuk's wonder and man-made wonders by Longlegs Lomas. The former Dragonstone Island Meester is his enlightenment teacher. Viserys is deeply impressed by the cemetery in Norvis, especially for Lomas's last description. The people around the cenote believe that this is the entrance to the underworld. These things aroused Viserys' curiosity a long time ago, but as more and more things happened later, Viserys had long forgotten these things. Unexpectedly, he was attracted to the vicinity of this cenote by accident at this time. Sure enough, this is also a bottomless pit, just like the cave where the old gods outside the wall were suppressed. The people around him were not wrong. Some of the bizarre myths in this world are very outrageous, and some must be believed, because many of them are not rumors, but real things. For example, the people living around the Norvis cenote claimed that this is the entrance to the underworld, but Viserys confirmed this after careful observation. This is indeed the entrance to an unknown place. Viserys is not sure whether this is the underworld or something else, but Viserys can be sure that this place and the bottomless pit outside the wall, the ruins of Illyria and other places are indeed from the same source, and they all have an inexplicable relationship with the black fog in his body. After Victarion was transported to King's Landing, the Red Priestess Melisandre came to Viserys that night and explained in detail what darkness and destruction means. The Red God's teachings are based on a dualistic worldview, that is, the Lord of Light, the God of heat and life, called by the Lord Ruler, and his mortal enemy, the God of darkness, cold and death. The endless struggle between them determines the fate of mankind. The battle between the Red God and the God of Cold is a war based on this world, and outside of this, there is another powerful force that has been coveting to invade this world and is constantly infiltrating. They are called destruction. There is a wall in the Red Temple headquarters in Volantis that reads darkness and destruction, which are the 2 major crises that threaten the entire world. The power of the God of Cold brings death, and the will of destruction will destroy the entire world. Even the God of Cold will be eliminated. According to the revelation brought by Allah, all gods except R'hllor are false gods, because they are likely to have been eroded by the will of destruction, such as the God of Cold and the old gods of the north. Only R'hllor remains clear-headed. Because of this, all believers of the Red God believers firmly believe that there is only one true God in the world, but the secrets are only known by the top leaders of the Red God faith. Melisandre comes from Ashay, which is a real magic city. There are wizards, sorcerers, alchemists, moonsingers, red monks, dark warlocks, necromancers, cloud wizards, fire wizards, blood wizards, torturers, trial knights, poisoners, priestesses, night walkers, shapeshifters, and believers of the Black Goat, Pale Holy Child and Night Lion. They are all welcome to Ashay, where there are no taboos. They can train their spells at will, without constraints or criticism. As long as they want, they can hold obscene rituals, have sex with demons, and talk about things that cannot be discussed publicly. The Red Priestess came out from here, so she naturally knew a lot of things that outsiders didn't know. Therefore, the Supreme Priest Binero always regarded Melisandre as a thorn in his side. But he just sent Makoro to Westeros to pick fruits, which was naturally not that easy. But darkness and destruction seemed to be reviving together. Viserys felt the restlessness in his heart and stood on the edge of the cenote, his long silver gold hair fluttering in the wind, and then clenched his fists. Happy New Year 2022. I hope all my friends will have good luck and peace in the coming year. Chapter 761 Archbishop. Originally, Viserys flew to Norvis to find this mysterious monk who had the power of prophecy. Unfortunately, when Viserys set out, he had already passed away. However, the body and the other part of his coffin disappeared, and the old monk did have the power of prophecy, so it was unknown whether he was really dead or pretended to die and didn't want to see Viserys. Even if it was the latter, Viserys did not force the other party to come out and meet him, so he rode on the dragon and prepared to leave. But at this time, Viserys sensed the existence of the black fog again, and then followed the call of his heart to find the Norvus cenote, which was praised by Longlegs Lummus as one of the 7 wonders made by the gods. Viserys discovered that this place had the same origin as the bottomless pit under the body of the old god outside the wall and the black hole left by the collapse of the 14 fire peaks in the ruins of Illyria. This cenote is also a bridge to the underground world. There was even an inexplicable impulse in Viserys' heart that kept urging him to throw himself into the embrace of the abyss, and it was even getting more and more intense, but he was held down tightly at the last moment. Go. Finally, the young man with silver gold hair no longer hesitated. He no longer gave himself any chance to waver, and then suddenly turned his head and strode onto Balerian's back, and then ordered it to fly away with him. Balerian's scholar eyes also looked at the back of his partner. Although he didn't know what happened, he could feel Viserys in a struggle just now through telepathy. He was very happy to see that the other party had overcome his will, and then the black dragon let out a low roar. Roar. The strong hind legs suddenly exerted force, sweeping the wind and knocking down the trees, carrying Viserys straight into the sky, and soon disappeared into the sky. At this time, King's Landing. Viserys had not been away from King's Landing for a long time, not even as long as the time he spent in Highgarden, which he called vacation, but something happened after he left. Something that is not a big deal, but also not a small deal. That is the fat archbishop, because the monks of the church must give up their family names, and the new archbishop must give up his secular name. This is because people believe that the person who holds the position of archbishop is no longer a person, but the spokesperson of the gods in heaven. However, this custom makes it difficult to distinguish between successive archbishops, so people can only refer to an archbishop by describing some characteristics. Now the archbishop of the Cathedral of St. Bela in King's Landing is called the Fat Archbishop. The trouble he got into is not that big. He just slept in the same bed with several women, engaged in flesh trade, and was directly dragged out and paraded through the streets. The people who did this were several fanatical believers of the 7 gods, which can even remind the people of King's Landing of the days when the Sparrows occupied the bottom of King's Landing many years ago. They used violence to oppose everything that did not conform to the teachings of the 7 gods. They believed that people were born sinful. They besieged brothels, smashed taverns, poured drinks all over the floor, and so on. These fanatical followers of the 7 gods claimed that they could not stand the archbishop's greed and corruption, so they stood up to expose the truth. However, no matter what kind of punishment they will receive after being caught, the archbishop's reputation will be ruined, and he will definitely not be able to continue to do his job. Otherwise the last fig leaf of the Church of the 7 gods will not be preserved. Therefore, the archbishops of various places decided to remove the archbishop through the College of Cardinals. The archbishops are responsible for their own beliefs, and are equivalent to the parliament in the church, called the College of Cardinals. Those who are too far away use ravens to convey. Generally, the archbishop is elected by the archbishop, and the archbishops can also unite to remove the archbishop when necessary. However, the church will not always be without an archbishop. Then who will be the next archbishop was put on the table, and several experienced archbishops were even ready to move. Although there is a precedent in history that the king directly appointed the archbishop, most of the time the Iron Throne will not interfere with the appointment of the archbishop, but it is elected by these monks themselves. Now that His Majesty the Emperor is not in King's Landing, the archbishops chose not to wait for Viserys to return, but held a meeting to elect him directly. But at this time, a name was directly mentioned, that is, Septon Egan. Although Egan gave up his surname, no one in the church would forget his original identity, especially because he still had that iconic silver hair. Egan was born in the imperial family of the empire and voluntarily devoted himself to the Church of the 7 gods. Although the archbishops are often produced from the archbishops, this is not absolute. There are many other examples in history. During the reign of Bela I, there was an archbishop who was a stonemason, and during the reign of Bela I, there was also an 8-year-old archbishop. Then there was a fierce game about the selection of the next archbishop of the church. although now with the continuous expansion of the empire's territory, the culture absorbed has become more diverse, and races, religious beliefs, etc. are flourishing. The influence of the Church of the Seven Gods is constantly declining, and there is no ability to influence and threaten the royal power during its peak period. However, although the Church of the Seven Gods is declining, after all, a lean camel is bigger than a horse. They are still the main body of the empire. Westeros and the Andals, the main ethnic group, believe in the religion with the largest number of people and the widest influence, so it is natural that they are valued. The name of Brother Egan was constantly mentioned and publicly discussed, including some of the good deeds he had done. For example, donating the food and clothing expenses of the royal family to the poor people, such as his frugal lifestyle, such as his willingness to have fun with the people in the poorest flea pits in King's Landing, etc. And Egan seemed to have people behind him who supported him. Although they did not appear in public, they all seemed to be powerful and came from the top of the empire. They could make King's Landing tremble just by stomping their feet. Although the archbishops of the church were considered figures in front of the common people, they naturally could not afford to offend such people. Therefore, in the end, in just a few days, from the outbreak of the incident of the archbishop soliciting prostitution to the dismissal, the entire process of the election of the new archbishop did not take too long, and was completed quickly. And Viserys also flew back to King's Landing at this time. However, His Majesty the Emperor seemed to have returned too quickly, so that some people in King's Landing were not prepared. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 762, Brother Egan, Uncle Viserys. King's Landing, in the Garden of the Red Keep. Ever since Egan left the Red Keep and joined the Great Sept of St. Bela, he has rarely returned to the Red Keep. Except for his sister Rhaenys and Uncle Oberyn who occasionally visited him, the rest of him was practicing in the September. His former dreams and ambitions were gradually worn out in the practice of the September. As Egan grew up, he understood his situation, and at the same time, he abandoned some unrealistic fantasies and became more calm and capable. However, when he saw his powerful uncle again, his heart couldn't help but beat faster, and his palms in the sleeves of the grey cloth robe couldn't help but clench, and his palms were full of sweat. There are many reasons why Egan would be nervous. Some of them are that children feel a little timid when they see their parents after doing bad things, and others are that they can't help but bow their heads because of the majesty and reverence they have always had. Viserys is Egan's idol. Although Egan has never talked about it publicly, in his heart, his uncle is more powerful than his father Rhaegar. His father Rhaegar was also famous and was known as the Silver Prince. He was widely loved and welcomed by the people. However, no matter how popular he was defeated in the end and lost the Iron Throne of the Targaryen family, which was won by his uncle Viserys. Because Egan had been educated as a royal heir since he was a child, he had begun to learn how to be an excellent ruler before he learned to walk. Therefore, when Viserys had no heir for a long time, Egan had always had an ambition in his heart. However, these ambitions eventually led to him taking off the crown and becoming a monk who was forced to give up his surname. Finally, until his sister Rhaenys gave birth to a son for Viserys, the last bit of ambition hidden in Egan's heart was completely shattered. However, good and bad are interdependent, and this indirectly led to Egan's burden being put down, and his mind became more open and bright, which was not necessarily a bad thing in the end. But in the final analysis, Egan's shadow was behind the High Septon's affairs, and he still couldn't help but feel nervous when facing his uncle. However, to Egan's surprise, Viserys did not blame him. "Egan, do you want to be the High Septon?" Viserys stood on the wall behind the Red Keep, overlooking the endless Blackwater Bay in the distance. The ships queuing to enter the port on the sea were shoulder to shoulder, and the port of King's Landing was full of bustling and thriving scenes. When Egan heard his uncle's question, he hesitated slightly, took a deep breath, and tried to calm his heartbeat, then looked at Viserys' back, chose not to lie, nodded and said, "Yes, uncle. I want to be the High Septon." From childhood to adulthood, Egan would be exposed every time he lied in front of Viserys, which also cast a deep psychological shadow on the child since childhood. However, every failure makes a wiser person. When Egan grew up, facing the lies that Viserys had learned in the church, he finally swallowed them back and chose to admit it directly. Viserys heard that Egan did not choose to lie, but directly admitted that the outbreak of the scandal of the Archbishop was planned by him. He immediately turned his head slightly and looked at the other party. When Egan faced the gaze of the Supreme Emperor of the Empire, his heartbeat, which had just stabilized, accelerated again, and his breathing could not help but become a little rapid. Yes, the scandal of the Archbishop was done by him. He found a few fanatical believers. Egan had lived with the Sparrows and had direct face-to-face communication with the big Sparrows, and even lived in the Sparrow's nest. In addition, he was born smart, so Egan could see at a glance which young people could be used. If the Sparrows had not perished, these people would definitely be the best candidates for Sparrows. Because these are people without brains, Egan casually inadvertently revealed a few words and sighed a few times, and they became props for Egan to use, and even did not look back. And all this is because Egan is no longer satisfied with continuing to mix seniority in the church. Because although Egan was born in the royal family and was almost born in Rome at the starting line, he still had to work step by step to gain qualifications in a place like the church, even if he had some resumes and identities and was destined to become a high bishop. However, Egan still had to wait until his teacher, the fat high bishop, died of old age before he could become a high bishop, and then wait until the next high bishop died before he could go further with the status of high bishop. But Egan couldn't wait any longer, and he really couldn't stand the current style of the church, so he slightly accelerated these processes and used his identity to win over relationships and build momentum. Egan relied on his sister Queen Rhaenys, his uncle Prince Oberyn, and another adoptive father, Finance Minister Illyrio, Intelligence Minister Varys, etc., and asked these bigwigs who could call the shots in the imperial political arena or the court to greet all parties on his behalf. Therefore, the archbishops from all over the church came to King's Landing and were under pressure from all sides and personal relationships. Naturally, they couldn't stand it, so they compromised. What to do? Will Uncle Viserys be angry about this? How will he punish me? Egan's mind went blank when he faced Viserys' gaze. His chest rose and fell, and his breathing was short. His heart almost jumped out of his throat. Why? However, at this moment, Egan finally heard Viserys' voice, and he breathed a sigh of relief like a drowning man grabbing a life-saving driftwood. Because I can't stand their style. Uncle Viserys. Viserys asked Egan why he did this in a very calm voice. After experiencing what happened just now, Egan took a deep breath and his mind became much clearer. Although I can't transform the church into an extreme fanatic organization like the High Sparrow, I should at least let the church play its due role. It should be the final harbor for believers, protect the suffering people, ease conflicts and stabilize society, rather than a machine for plundering money. Egan did not hide the fact that he had a connection with the High Sparrow. At that time, he regarded himself as the heir to the king, so he hoped to get the support of the grassroots people from the High Sparrow, but in the end he was severely beaten by Viserys. If it were Egan many years ago, he might have tried his best to distance himself from the High Sparrow, but now Egan suddenly realized what he should do. Since Uncle Viserys already knew the truth, there was no point in continuing to hide it from him. Chapter 763 Jenny. Egan chose to confess his thoughts and then waited anxiously for the result. He didn't know how his Uncle Viserys would punish him, but what Egan didn't expect was that after hearing Viserys' words, he looked at him with a different look for the first time, with praise and more complex thoughts in his eyes. Very good. In that case, the position of the Archbishop is yours, Egan. Viserys patted Egan on the shoulder and said nothing more. He didn't punish Egan for this. In his opinion, the fat archbishop was also corrupt. If it weren't for his obedience, Viserys would have taken him down long ago. Then Viserys left the city wall with his squire Robb. Robb also took a last look at Egan, leaving him standing there alone, staring at his uncle's back. The power class of the empire has now begun to solidify. Most of the soldiers and knights who made contributions in the early days of conquering the world have become nobles. Because of Viserys' relaxed aristocratic policy, when he won 2 conquest wars and successfully won the 7 kingdoms, he issued a large number of noble titles, and the nobles in the 7 kingdoms also ushered in the most explosive number in history. In the past, nobles, even knight families, generally had their own castles or villages. However, during the new dynasty, many soldiers of humble origins also caught up with the tide of the times and transformed themselves into peasant nobles. Although most of their fiefs were just farmland, this also represented a class transition and a change in identity. However, since the empire has gradually begun to stabilize in recent years and has not launched wars against foreign countries, the number of new nobles has begun to drop sharply. Because of the new regulations, war is the best way to give birth to nobles, and those nobles who were once mudlegs have gradually gained a foothold. Although they were once of humble origins, when they became nobles, they were separated from their former identities. Therefore, it is natural that personal relationships have gradually appeared in the empire, and it is normal for officials to protect each other. This is a social problem, and also a problem of human nature. Now the high-ranking officials of the empire have also completed the change of identity long ago. Your Majesty, Lord Mistoin is seriously ill and his health is getting worse. He may have planned to resign as the Prime Minister. High Court, the exclusive back garden of the imperial family. After a tour of Essos, Viserys returned to King's Landing. However, he did not stay in King's Landing for a few days and then returned to High Garden. High Garden is now Viserys' main office. The operation of the empire mainly depends on the ministers of the Council of the King, and they work hard. On some important decisions, they must ask His Majesty the Emperor for instructions. Viserys sat in High Garden and controlled this huge empire that he built and spanned both sides of the narrow sea. However, most of the ministers of the Council of the King stayed in King's Landing to work. After all, King's Landing is still the political core of the empire. But there is one person who is like a dog following Viserys' ass. He will run to wherever he is. He is the Commander-in-Chief of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, Earl Ramsay Bolton of Harrenhal. As the earliest loyal dog to follow Viserys, Ramsay has no merits but hard work. Moreover, he has done too many things for Viserys. He knows that, no matter how many people hate him, as long as he is not out of favor with His Majesty the Emperor, no one can touch him. When the news of Qyburn's dissection of the corpse spread, many people in King's Landing were outraged. But what was the result? Qyburn was fine, and he almost regained his status as a bachelor. But now it doesn't matter to Qyburn whether he regains his status as a bachelor or not, because Ramsay knows very well the status of Qyburn in Viserys' mind. Qyburn is also a member of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. He joined the secret agency such as the Ministry of Internal Affairs as soon as he was found by His Majesty the Emperor and brought to King's Landing. However, Qyburn's identity and status are special. He is a special talent and naturally cannot be used as an ordinary spy. Even the sources of many of Qyburn's corpses and living bodies were arranged by Ramsay. Therefore, as a humble bastard, Ramsay eventually became the governor of Harrenhal and even held the power of life and death, becoming one of the people who dared not offend the most in the empire. Some people would rather offend the prime minister than Ramsay, and it is not a very abrupt thing that Mistoin is now seriously ill and intends to resign. The health of the Lord of Casterly Rock, the governor of the Westerlands, has never been very good. When he was still the leader of the Golden Company, he had some old injuries, which occasionally recurred and made him suffer. In fact, if the original trajectory was followed, Mistoin should have died of illness in 296 Egan's calendar. Now he has lived for 3 more years, which is not a loss. However, Mistoin does not have to worry about no one behind him, because he married a beautiful Westerland girl of noble birth a few years ago, and gave birth to a son for him. The Toyne family has no foundation in the Westerlands. Although most of the nobles in the Westerlands have been hit hard in the turmoil and war many years ago, and many have even disappeared forever in the long river of history, it is not so easy for the Toyne family to completely replace the Lannister family and rule Casterly Rock and the Westerlands. Therefore, Mistoin adopted the simplest and most powerful method, which is to marry a Westerland girl. However, this simple request is not easy. Because of the war, the people of the Westerlands resisted tenaciously under the leadership of Duke Tywin, and Rhaenys rode the dragon regal in the sky of the Westerlands for several months, constantly setting fire to cities, villages, and forests. Therefore, although many people in the Westerlands have given up resistance and become citizens of the Empire, they still hate the Targaryen family. After all, many of their relatives and friends died in that tragic war. These need time to stabilize. The Westerlands are now one of the most unstable places in the Empire, and Misthoin is regarded as the representative of the Targaryen family's rule over the Westerlands. Although the nobles of the Westerlands will not resist openly, it is not so easy for the Toyne family to rule the Westerlands smoothly. Therefore, when Misthoin wanted to marry a girl of marriageable age from a noble in the Westerlands, he encountered obstacles. After all, Misthoin's appearance is famous for being ugly, with a big nose, a crooked chin and pot-shaped ears. Most women will be scared away when they see his appearance. Moreover, he was already quite old, but he wanted a young and beautiful noble girl under the age of 20 to be his wife. After all, in addition to his illegitimate son in Essos, Misthoin needed a legitimate heir. His future wife must be fertile and able to give birth to children for him. It would be better if she was pretty to neutralize Misthoin's ugly appearance gene. However, at this time, a family with a long history in the West, but now gradually declining with the changes of the times, came to the door. They urgently needed to rely on the governor of the West to restore their family's former status, so the patriarch of the family agreed to marry his eldest daughter to Misthoin, and the girl who later married Misthoin was Jean Westerling. Chapter 764. Changes in the Imperial Council. As a declining wealthy family, Jean's family needed to be revived. It was a natural match made in heaven to be with the newly rising family of the governor of the West. The Toyne family also needed a family with noble blood and a long history to help him rule the West. Therefore, this shy beautiful girl with chestnut curly hair married Misthoin, the governor of the West, who was the prime minister, and gave birth to a son named John 2 years ago. This was to commemorate his good friend John Clinton, who was shot and killed by a cold arrow when he led the army to suppress the rebellion in Dawn many years ago, and John Clinton's posthumous son had already been born. He is now 4 years old and has succeeded to the Earl of Storm's End, the patriarch of the Clinton family, but he did not inherit the position of governor of the Stormlands. After all, it was too ridiculous to let a 4-year-old child be the governor with the new policy. John Clinton's son was named Rhaegar Clinton. This was John's own intention, but as a soul, he had no way to express it, so he named Clinton Jr. through Viserys. As for the position of governor of Stormlands, it now fell into the hands of Onion Knight Davos. Because he is now the most powerful person among the nobles of Stormlands, and it is never too late for a gentleman to take revenge. Davos once avenged Stannis and killed the 3 nobles who humiliated Stannis' body at Storm's End. He also established his prestige among the nobles of Stormlands, and thus won the respect of the nobles of Stormlands. In fact, Misthoin only had the idea of resigning. He had not formally proposed it to Viserys. This was the news that Ramsay heard from somewhere. Misthoin was still hesitant, but he had discussed it with his entourage in private, because even if he resigned from the position of Prime Minister, he still needed to stay in King's Landing to recuperate. He had entrusted Casterly Rock to the family steward to manage, and his wife and children, Jean of Cliff Rock and Little John Toyne, were all brought to King's Landing. King's Landing has the only public hospital in the Empire, and it also has the best doctors in the Empire. Because of Misthoin's high position, the person who treated him was Dr. Ambrose, who was wearing a silver collar and was now the dean of the Imperial Medical School after the split of the Citadel. Therefore, Misthoin felt that he was too weak to continue working, and he would not leave King's Landing, even if he resigned from the position of Prime Minister. In fact, because of the Imperial Medical School, there are still many Imperial nobles who are staying in King's Landing to enjoy their old age. If Misthoin submits his resignation, I will agree to transfer Willis Tyrrell, the governor of Gulltown, to King's Landing. Viserys stood in his study in High Garden, standing on the open-air balcony of white marble, holding the gorgeous and elegant golden fence, looking at the endless golden sea of flowers in the distance, and then spoke without looking back. Viserys has always been aware of Miss Toyn's physical problems, but this is an old injury. Viserys may have some means to help him prolong his life, but he does not intend to do so. He has the means to change the world, and also the direction, to set off a leap forward in the world's civilization. However, since the last chat with the children of the forest, Viserys listened to Yeezy's opinion and temporarily gave up this idea. He did not want to interfere too much with the normal process of this world. Things should develop according to his normal evolutionary laws. If he forced the times to move forward quickly, some unexpected situations might occur. The children of the forest, an ancient creature that has lived for countless thousands of years, still sees things more thoroughly than humans, a short-lived species. Yes, your majesty. Ramsay, who was kneeling on the ground, heard Viserys' words and nodded quickly. Others may not know, but Ramsay, as Viserys' loyal dog, naturally knows that Willis Tyrrell has always been valued by Viserys. He was transferred to Gulltown as the governor there a few years ago. He left the imperial capital and began to experience it below, and he was also independent. And Willis did not live up to Viserys' trust. He had already rubbed off some of his glitz when he was an imperial tax collector. He transformed from a high-ranking high court heir to a very pragmatic and capable imperial official. He took to completely opposite paths from his grandmother. During the years as the governor of Gulltown, Willis Tyrrell fully utilized his extensive knowledge and ability. At the same time, he also learned some experiences and lessons from his time as a tax collector in King's Landing, vigorously developed commercial construction, built ports, and expanded the scale of the city. He also applied to the Imperial Council to build a hospital, and at the same time, contacted the Imperial Medical College to build a magnificent building in the center of Gulltown. In the future, it will be the second city with a public hospital besides King's Landing. The Imperial Council of the Empire also chose Gulltown to pilot the popularization of education. Today, the education system of the Imperial Academy is still a recommendation system. Outsiders need layers of relationships to enroll. It is not impossible for ordinary citizens without noble status, but it is even more difficult. But the pilot of the Imperial Council in Gulltown is that for children of school age, they can only enroll after paying a certain tuition fee. Although common people may not be able to afford it, the nobles and wealthy businessmen can still afford it, but the road must be taken step by step. If you take a big step, you will easily get into trouble. And Willis Tyrrell has done a good job in Gulltown in the past few years. The whole city is thriving and has become the pillar of the Valor's economy. Therefore, it is not difficult to explain why Viserys wanted to transfer Willis back to King's Landing when Miss Toyn was seriously ill. Ramsay knelt on the ground, secretly guessing the Emperor's thoughts in his heart. However, at this moment, Viserys seemed to think of something again, and then spoke. I heard that the Minister of Finance Illyrio fell some time ago. Illyrio accidentally fell off his horse in public when he was patrolling the port of Blackwater Bay. It is said that the fall was not light, and many people present saw it. Therefore, when Viserys returned to King's Landing, Illyrio used this as an excuse to hide at home, and did not go to see Viserys. And Viserys did not mention this matter, but just found Egan to chat. However, Ramsay didn't know why the Emperor suddenly brought up this matter at this time, and was slightly stunned. Yes, your majesty. Lord Illyrio accidentally fell off his horse, and many people saw it. But Lord Illyrio doesn't ride a horse on weekdays. He always rides a carriage or a sedan chair. I don't know why he had to ride a horse on a whim that day, and then fell off the horse. Yeah, it's unlucky. Viserys stood on the white marble balcony and looked at the sunset in the distance and nodded slightly. This kind of thing has no beginning or end. It is difficult to think of any problem if you don't connect everything together. However, at this moment, a light voice fell. In that case, let Illyrio and him stay at home to recuperate when Miss Toyn submits his resignation. Viserys' voice was calm, and Ramsay, who was kneeling on the ground on the other side, was stunned when he heard this sentence, and then his face changed slightly. Chapter 765 Diana. Except for some changes, such as the former Stormland Governor John Connington was shot and killed in the Dawn Rebellion, and the current Prime Minister Maestar wanted to resign due to health reasons. The other members of the Royal Council still maintained the appearance of the early days of the establishment of the Empire. except for a few new positions. No one has been removed. And now His Majesty the Emperor suddenly asked the Minister of Finance Illyrio, who fell off the horse, to go home and rest for a while. Although he did not directly remove his position, it was definitely a very severe warning. The next time may not be as simple as removing the official position. And thinking about what happened not long ago, in fact, the Commander-in-Chief of the Ministry of Internal Affairs has a lot of hands and eyes, and there is no news in the whole King's Landing that can be hidden from Ramsay. Of course, he knew that Illyrio had intervened in the affairs of the royal family, but this seemed to touch the bottom line of His Majesty. His Majesty can forgive and tolerate Egan, but he can never tolerate Illyrio's behavior. At that time, Ramsay thought that the Emperor had pardoned Egan and personally appointed him as the Archbishop of the Church of the Seven Gods. The Chancellor of Finance Illyrio seemed to have gotten away with it, but he did not expect to be waiting for him here. However, Ramsay would not sympathize with the other party. Although he was qualified to attend the Royal Council, the reason why he rarely attended was the same. Ramsay Bolton's work and special status led him to want to live. If he wanted to maintain such a status forever, he could not be friends with any important ministers of the Royal Council. Your Majesty. The young man with black hair and pale face heard Viserys' words, and a gloomy smile suddenly appeared at the corner of his mouth. Then he kowtowed again and retreated. High Garden is the back garden of the imperial family. Now it no longer looks like the war. The high walls have been painted clean, the traces of swords have been smoothed, and the gardens are full of various exotic flowers and plants, like a natural paradise. The entire castle is dotted with gardens, pools, and artificial waterfalls. The castle is full of stone carvings, fountains, and marble columns. Grapes and roses decorate the walls and sculptures, and the ancient buildings are covered with vines. From the Tower of High Garden, you can see all the manors and fields within a few leagues, and the fields are full of flowers and golden roses. In the sky above this field, a red dragon with a length of tens of meters is flying. Her body is covered with fiery red scales, her head is raised and fierce, and her body is strong. It is even difficult for outsiders to tell that this is a female dragon. In the towering tower, Viserys was standing on the white marble balcony, bathing in the golden sunlight of the sunset, looking at the red dragon circling and roaring in the sky, and Ramsay had retreated. There was no one in the room at this moment. At this moment, there was a sound of opening the door outside Viserys' study. The silver-haired young man tilted his head slightly, and a woman wearing a sandy yellow dress and gold jewelry slowly walked towards her. She looks a lot like your Balerion, doesn't she? The person who came was Viserys' eldest queen, Princess Irian Martell of Dawn. She came to her husband's side, placed her palm on the golden railing, and spoke softly. The queen of the empire had shiny black curly hair, olive skin, and big eyes. She had gorgeous golden earrings hanging from her ears. She wore a sandy yellow dress that half exposed her breasts. A glittering golden necklace was worn around her neck, and a dazzling ruby was hanging on her plump chest. Irian, who had been married for more than 7 years, had become more and more mature and stable, and more like an imperial queen who was the mother of the country. However, in addition to the queen's temperament, the former Princess of Dawn also had a charming and noble charm in her every move. Yeah. When Viserys saw his wife coming to him, he turned his head and looked at her, then reached out and held her soft palm, then looked at the red dragon hovering above his head and nodded. Vhagar is worthy of being the eldest sister of the 5 young dragons. She really has the temperament of an elder sister. Viserys took Irian's hand and gently embraced the woman into his arms, sniffing the fragrance of his wife, and then added, "Like you and Diana." Irian immediately chuckled and couldn't help but smile. As the eldest princess of the Kingdom of Dawn, Irian should have been the heir of Dawn, because of the culture and customs of Dawn. But her father, Prince Doran, did not want Irian to inherit Dawn, so he married her to Viserys as a gift for a political marriage. However, Viserys really rose in the east, counterattacked Westeros and seized the Iron Throne, which was also a sign of Prince Doran's wisdom. And Diana, the daughter of Viserys and Irian, although still young at only 6 years old, has already initially revealed the dangerous temperament of her mother. Diana has a very strong personality. She doesn't like to wear skirts that little girls like, but prefers simpler and more comfortable coats and breeches. Usually, girls of her age have long hair, but Diana still has short silver gold hair. And she also refused to learn the craft of women's needlework and how to be an elegant and noble princess from the court ladies. Instead, she prefers to practice swordsmanship with her father's two servants Robb Stark and Gendry, and the female knight of the King's Guard as her teacher. However, although Diana's personality is lively and active, she is definitely not a tomboy. She perfectly inherited her father's beautiful silver gold short hair, which is also shining in the sun, and a pair of pure and crystal lavender eyes like gems, which are even purer than the blood of her aunt Princess Daenerys. Little Diana Targaryen is definitely a complete beauty embryo. Anyone who has seen this little princess can foresee that she will definitely become a complete beauty in the future. Of course, the premise is that she is willing to wear a long skirt. However, facing their daughter's obvious problems, Viserys and Tyrion were helpless because this was their first child and they were reluctant to beat or scold her. But fortunately, both Viserys and Tyrion were very casual people and their vision was more open-minded than that of people of this era. Tyrion had been sleeping in the same bed with Viserys for 7 years, so she was influenced by him, so in the end, they both let it go. Ugh, Vhagar, charge. And now Viserys and his wife are hugging each other on the Tower of Highgarden. The short-haired girl in the sky tightly grasped the saddle ring on Vhagar's back. The strong wind above the clouds blew her hair, and her beautiful eyes curved into crescents. Chapter 766 Miscarriage. The wind whistled overhead, and the silver short hair fluttered. Then Vhagar descended from the blue sky of Highgarden carrying the little princess Diana Targaryen. Viserys was wearing a casual suit with silver threads and a coat of arms on his chest. Beside him stood his two wives, Tyrion and Rhaenys, who were quietly looking at the girl climbing down from the dragon's back under the fountain in the Highgarden garden. Dad. When little Diana saw Viserys, her eyes lit up immediately. Her white and tender little arms grabbed the scales on the dragon's back. Then she jumped down along Vhagar's drooping wings and ran towards Viserys. On the other side, the red female dragon Vhagar, who could barely lie on the open space in the garden, also turned his head and saw that his sister Diana had jumped off his body. His huge and ferocious head suddenly raised slightly, and a rolling sound came from his throat. She looked at Viserys, and her scalded eyes actually had human-like emotions. The 5 young dragons were found by Maya, who was a female mercenary at the time, and then brought out by Viserys, who personally hatched them with his own blood power. Therefore, the 5 young dragons regarded Viserys as their father. Although dragons are highly intelligent creatures, they still have many animal thoughts in the final analysis. They have developed a sentiment of attachment to Viserys. However, now the 5 young dragons have grown up. Although they are not yet adults, they are not far away enough to be called young dragons. However, perhaps because they were all hatched by Viserys with the power of blood, no matter how old the children are, they are always children in front of their father. Viserys sometimes still calls them 5 little ones. But now the 5 young dragons are the undisputed overlords of the sky in the eyes of others, and even have their own nicknames. For example, Vhagar is called Red Queen. There was an incident of faceless men stealing dragons in Andalus, but now no one dares to steal them, even if these 5 dragons are released to roam freely. Although Viserys has no restrictions on these dragons now, the royal forest is large enough to accommodate them, and there is no problem with territory, because dragons are social animals. The strongest dragon becomes the family leader, and the other dragons are protected by it, and the other dragons will also perform their duties. Even if there are other male dragons in the family, there will be no civil war in the future. This is a manifestation of the high IQ of the dragon family. They even know how to respect the elderly and love the young. Of course, it is also related to the fact that the older the dragons are, the larger their size will be. As the 5 young dragons grow up, these dragons living in the royal forest will occasionally fly away, but they will fly back again in a few days. They have already regarded this place as their home. Dad. Little Diana jumped off the dragon's back, her dazzling silver gold short hair fluttering, and then ran over and hugged her father. Diana. Viserys also smiled and picked up his daughter, then put her on his arm, and Diana kissed Viserys gently on the cheek. Ah. Bit, it pricks. Diana kissed her father on the face, then waved her hand with a look of disgust. It was obvious that Viserys had not shaved cleanly this morning, and it pricked her little daughter. Dad, switch sides. Then Diana asked Viserys to switch sides again. The girl's clear lavender eyes carefully looked at her father's cheek and found a place without stubble and kissed it gently, and then she was satisfied. Mother. Diana looked at the two women standing behind her father, one of whom was her mother Irian, and the other was her Aunt Rhaenys. Aunt Rhaenys. Diana was still young, and she didn't know why her father would marry her aunt and give birth to a younger brother for her. However, later Diana heard her grandfather, the Grand Maester who taught her, casually mentioned that her aunt should actually be her equal. These things confused Diana, but she did not dwell on these things too much. Although the girl was still young, she had already revealed her straightforward character. She would call whatever the adults asked her to call. When her mother was not around, she would call Rhaenys mother, and when her mother was around, in order to make a distinction, Diana usually called Rhaenys aunt. Diana, I told you. You are still young, and it is still dangerous to ride a dragon now. When Irian saw her daughter jumping off the dragon's back, although she had expected it, she couldn't help but frown slightly, and spoke with a little stern voice. The beautiful little girl sitting on Viserys' arm couldn't help shrinking her neck when she heard her mother's words. She was not afraid of her father, but she was very afraid of her mother. Because Viserys was busy with official duties and rarely disciplined Diana in person, the burden of educating Diana had always been on Irian. In addition, Irian had a hot temper, harsh but sexy, especially after the miscarriage. Diana was naturally a little afraid of her mother. Irian became pregnant earlier than Rhaenys, and she might have had the opportunity to give birth to Viserys' eldest son. Unfortunately, due to an accident, Irian miscarried, and she has not been pregnant again since then, which has caused the temper of this noble Dawn princess to be slightly unbalanced. However, a few years have passed, and Irian's character has recovered a lot. For this era of backward medical conditions, even the royal family is not immune. Accidents are sometimes so unexpected, and dystocia and miscarriage are normal. Viserys' mother, Queen Rhaela, died when she gave birth to her sister Daenerys, and the same is true for the mother of Tyrion Lannister, the little devil. Such incidents will happen frequently in aristocratic families, and giving birth to ordinary people is more like passing through the gates of hell. On the other side, the slender and graceful little queen with long brown hair saw Diana being scolded by Irian, and couldn't help showing an awkward but polite smile. However, this scene was caught by Diana hiding in Viserys' arms, and she pouted immediately. Diana and her aunt had a very compatible personality. She had the danger of Irian, but also the liveliness and playfulness of Rhaenys. I'm going to play with my brother. Chapter 767 Brown hair purple eyes. Then Diana didn't dare to talk back to her mother. She jumped down from Viserys' arms. Then she ran to the side and pulled up her brother, a little brown-haired boy who was kneeling by the pool and quietly observing the goldfish swimming. Heroes' personality was quiet, not as lively and active as a child, and even less naughty than his sister. It seemed that he was born to like loneliness. He knelt there without any sense of existence, and even the dragon, that fell from the sky and then left, did not attract his attention. Because Heroes was carefully observing the activities of the goldfish, his personality was very easy to concentrate. When he was concentrating on something, other things would be ignored by him. This characteristic of his personality was very similar to Viserys. Sometimes he would accidentally spend a day thinking about things, but Hero's personality was not the same as his mother Rhaenys. When Rhaenys was young, she was a little king, but she restrained herself a little when she grew up. Then the little brown-haired boy who was kneeling by the pool and watching the water waves gently rippling and slightly absent-minded was pulled up from the ground by his sister unexpectedly. The relationship between the two siblings, it's great. The three adults on the other side watched Diana playing with Heroes, who was forced to work, and were silent for a while. Then Rhaenys couldn't help but smile and speak again. The olive-skinned queen, who had a sexy figure and noble temperament, looked at the scene in front of her, and her expression changed slightly, because this scene reminded her of the scene when she and her brother Quentyn Martell played in the flowing water garden outside Sunspear City. There were also fountains, pools, and gardens there. The age difference between her and her brother was similar to that of Diana and Heroes. It was also a perfect childhood at that time. There was no desire, no demand, no intrigue among adults, and there was only the deep relationship between the two children. One of them is the moon and the other is the Sunday. Diana and Heroes were named by Viserys. These two names represent the moon god and the sun god respectively in a certain civilization. Although neither Rhaenys nor Aerion knew which civilization Viserys was talking about, they knew that their husbands were well read and had a photographic memory. As long as they did not ask in detail, they would not expose the fact that they were short-sighted. Viserys, perhaps. Aerion was wearing a sand yellow gauze skirt, lined with a tight-fitting bodysuit, and golden earrings pierced through her earlobes, looking noble and mysterious, shining brightly under the setting sun. Let's talk about the future. When Viserys heard Aerion's words, and knew what she wanted to express, he frowned slightly, then stretched, and then spoke. Yeah, I see. Aerion on the other side also knew that it was indeed a little too early for her to bring up this matter now. She nodded slightly, and said nothing more. The two queens of Viserys now have very distinct personalities and appearances. The Dornish princess has a hot temper, harsh but emotional. She is sexier than Rhaenys, and has a better figure. The little queen was lively and naughty, with a slender and graceful figure. Rhaenys was taller than Aerion. The two were of equal status, both of noble blood and origin. After marrying the two wives, Viserys did not favor one more obviously, but treated them equally. He would accompany Aerion for one night, if he accompanied Rhaenys for one night, because favoritism and disfavor have always been the root of chaos in the harem, and Viserys did not want his harem to catch fire. Fortunately, his two wives were very sensible. They did not use various methods to compete for their common husbands like the dynasties with multiple queens in the past, and even did not hesitate to kill others, to cause chaos in the harem. The fact that His Majesty married two queens also caused a small controversy within the empire, which was mainly due to the dissatisfaction of the believers of the Church of the Seven Gods. Because the doctrine of the Church of the Seven Gods implements monogamy, the wife must be loyal to the husband, and the husband is also the same. Otherwise it is a bigamy, and the traditional customs of the Targaryen family are also sins in the eyes of the church. Several conflicts have broken out in history because of this, the most famous of which is the armed uprising of the Order in the 41st year of the Egan calendar. This chaos and war led to national turmoil, bloodshed, and the replacement of three kings. The final result was that the Targaryen family suppressed the armed uprising of the Order with blood and fire, and disbanded the warrior's son and the poor assembly forever. Therefore, Viserys has become increasingly dissatisfied with the church's style in recent years, especially the fanatical believers of the Seven Gods. He never shows mercy when suppressing fanatical believers such as the Sparrows, and sends spies from the Ministry of Internal Affairs to hunt down these people until they are killed cleanly and they dare not resist. The Red God Church is very smart in this regard. The Red Monks follow the will of the Emperor and constantly advocate the benefits of marrying multiple queens, which makes Viserys more and more satisfied. In this traditional era, there is nothing wrong with men being lustful, especially as kings and emperors. There are actually not many monogamous kings in history, and they all have several lovers in private. For example, Megarai had 6 wives, and King Aegon IV claimed to have slept with 900 women. Although he might not have this ability with his body, he also had 9 open mistresses. Viserys also admitted that he married Rhaenys for desire. At the same time, he had many lovers besides his 2 wives, but outsiders rarely knew about it. As the loyal dog of the Emperor of the Empire, the dog naturally follows behind the master and cleans up his tail at all times. Viserys has an excellent body and appearance, coupled with a high status. It is easy for him to seduce women, which is also a dimensionality reduction attack for other men. However, more women who covet his status and appearance took the initiative to climb into his bed. Going to bed with the Emperor of the Empire is a win-win for them. As for the hair color of his son Heroes Targaryen, this was also beyond Viserys' expectations. Diana, his daughter with Aerion, perfectly inherited the bloodline characteristics of the Targaryen family, with silver hair and purple eyes, and close to dragons. The eldest son born to him by Rhaenys, who had half of Rhaegar's blood, only inherited the characteristic of purple eyes, and did not inherit the characteristic silver gold hair of the Targaryen family. Chapter 768 Daenerys. But Viserys was sure that this was his son, because he believed in his wife Rhaenys. And Rhaenys didn't have purple eyes, her eyes were dark, and little heroes also showed closeness to dragons. This is a genetic probability problem. Children are gifts given to people by fate, and it is impossible to be 100% satisfactory. The second of the 5 young dragons, Terex, who was golden like the sun, became the partner of little heroes after the eldest sister Vaga chose Diana. Because the other dragons, the dark blue female dragon Meryx, the beautiful little lady crystal dragon Syrinx, and the youngest brother Silver Nugget did not dare to compete with their second brother. Red Queen Vaga is the most fierce eldest sister among the brothers and sisters, and the second is the arrogant Terex, who has a domineering golden scale, and is as dazzling as the sun on a sunny day. When it hatched from the dragon egg, it was only 1 step slower than its elder sister, so it ranked second. Vaga and Terex did grow faster than the other young dragons, and their strength was also higher. As for the other dragons, the youngest brother Silver Nugget was depressed, and even had signs of dying, because of congenital deficiencies, when he was young. But Viserys saved his life with the Black Mist, but the sequel of using the Black Mist had not yet appeared, and Viserys was not clear. And Silver Nugget also grew up a lot, after experiencing a kidnapping incident, becoming more brave and fierce, instead of staying in the corner, and not saying a word. However, little heroes did show that he was not as talented as his sister. His relationship with his partner Terex did not progress very quickly, but rather slowly like a long stream. Of course, perhaps Heroes' talent was not bad, but because his sister Diana's talent was too abnormal, Heroes was obviously indistinguishable from the crowd. In fact, looking at the history of the Targaryen family, Heroes was not too old to get close to the dragon. Heroes even surpassed many people. Heroes was definitely not mediocre in talent. It's just that there are always better people. His sister Dina is more talented. Viserys, what do you want for dinner today? I'll let Chris arrange it. Looking at little Diana and her son playing in the fountain garden of Highgarden, Rhaenys slightly retracted her gaze. The sunset above her head had gradually fallen, and it was almost time for dinner. Chris was the royal chef of Highgarden, and also the chef of the former Tyrell family of Highgarden. He cooked well. The current steward of Highgarden is still Garth Tyrell, the uncle of the deceased Duke of Mace. After all, the Tyrell family was still very professional when they were stewards. Well, bake eel pie, and let Chris make a pot of corn cream soup. Viserys thought for a moment after hearing what Rhaenys said, shook his head and said, what to eat for dinner is really a century-old problem, and he just said it casually according to his own taste. Okay. The little queen with brown curly hair looked at her husband's profile, smiled sweetly, and then turned and left with her long skirt. At the same time, a silver-haired girl in a pure white gauze dress was standing quietly in the corridor of the white marble tower in the High Court garden. She had beautiful waist-length hair that looked like molten silver, clear and bright purple eyes, and a beautiful face that looked like the god's careful carving. Anyone who saw her for the first time couldn't help but hold their breath. The silver-haired girl was standing quietly in the corridor, covered with red clouds, looking at Viserys and Rhaenys standing side by side below, and her niece Diana and nephew Little Heroes playing in the garden. There seemed to be a little sadness in her eyebrows, and then she pursed her lips. The silver-haired girl standing in the sunset in the corridor was Daenerys. She was 15 years old this year. According to the rules of Westeros, she was about to hold her adult ceremony. However, Daenerys seemed a little depressed because her first period had come 2 years ago, and according to custom, she could get married. People around the silver-haired girl have been saying that she would marry Viserys sooner or later. Everyone thought so, because no one would be more suitable to marry His Majesty the Emperor than Daenerys. This was simply a match made in heaven, and she herself was looking forward to it deep in her heart. However, although everyone around her said so, including the palace steward, the old nanny, and even her best friend Miss Andy, Viserys seemed not to hear it, and kept turning a deaf ear to it. This even made Daenerys wonder if Viserys didn't like her. What was wrong with her appearance? And Viserys was very good to Daenerys, but this was still a kind of snubbing in the eyes of the silver-haired girl. Therefore, Daenerys has been a little depressed recently. Dany, what are you looking at? At this time, a voice came from behind, and a girl with dark hair, wearing a standard blue-green uniform, and dressed as a palace maid came over. She has a flat round face, dark complexion, and a pair of golden eyes. She is holding a thick tome in her arms and standing at the end of the corridor, looking at Inaris curiously. She is Miss Andy of North Island. Now she has grown from a little girl to a knowledgeable girl, with a pair of gold-rimmed monocles on her face. This is an exquisite handmade product from the city-state of Mir on the other side of the narrow sea. Each pair is very expensive. Only the nobles and wealthy merchants of the trading city-state can afford it. However, Miss Andy relied on her excellent grades in the academy and won scholarships for many years. Finally, she bought it at her own expense and gave it to herself as a birthday present. Miss Andy has a very high talent for learning. Although she is only a teenager now, she has fully developed her potential after systematic study and training. She is enough to kill many bachelors in the academy in seconds. If she were not a girl and a foreigner, she might have been qualified to win multiple bachelor links. There are still many old and outdated rules in the Split Academy waiting to be improved one by one. However, Miss Andy was able to study at the Imperial School of Economics and the Imperial School of Medicine because of the royal family, and as the only girl here, she beat all adult men and won the first place in the school for many years. Daenerys had followed Miss Andy to study several times, but it was obvious that Daenerys received royal education, and the university scholar came to teach in person, and the content of the study was different from the knowledge in the academy, so she never went there again. No, I didn't see anything. The silver-haired girl heard the voice from behind, and her beautiful face suddenly changed slightly. Then Daenerys turned around quickly, smiled awkwardly and blocked her best friend, as if she didn't want her to discover her thoughts. Really? Miss Andy hugged the book, scratched her hair, and looked down the tower through the gap blocked by Daenerys, a little confused. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 769, Astrological Disorder. 2 months later, King's Landing. A white crow from Old Town brought a message. The white crows of Old Town are not released on weekdays, and they only report when the seasons change. However, this time, the white crows of Old Town did not bring news of the change of seasons, but the words in the letter were full of doubts. Because the stars changed this time, but the doctors who stayed in the Old Town Academy could not judge the change of seasons. Bachelors and doctors of astronomy use a subject called astrology to judge the change of seasons, the length of the day and the shortness of the night, the waxing and waning of the moon and the position, or the 12 constellations in the sky, etc. But now until recently, the stars of the whole world have undergone earth-shaking changes, which subverted the laws of previous astrological records. For example, we are now in the long summer stage, which means that the days are long and the nights are short. However, now the law of day and night has been disrupted, the constellations have shifted from their previous orbits, and the waxing and waning of the moon has begun to become irregular. What's going on? In the room of the Imperial Master Marwyn, a huge white crow was standing by the window. It had a bald head like a bull, a thick neck and a chin like a stone slab. Dr. Marwyn sat in his room and looked at the letter written to him by Drivine Garverin, and he was a little confused. This kind of astrological disorder was really the first time in recorded history, because in the eyes of the Citadel, the astrology represented the law of the operation of the entire world, and was the final code to crack the mystery of the world. There would never be any mistakes in the rules of astrology. There had been no problems in the thousands of years since humans began to record in writing, so this was really the first time in the ages. Not only Drivine Garverin, who wore a bronze ring, a scepter and a mask, but Dr. Marwyn, the Grand Secretary of the court, was also confused. There was an ancient book on his desk, and on the other side were messy drafts. In addition to doing his normal work as a Grand Secretary, Dr. Marwyn usually studied and deciphered this ancient book. This is what Viserys brought out from the ruins of Valyria. According to him, this book is in the hands of a Valyrian nobleman, and even the 5 dragon eggs were stolen from his home. However, the nobleman has gone crazy and turned into a monster, not like a human being. Dr. Marwin spent several years and a lot of energy to decipher this important book, but he also broadened his horizons from this book and solved many unsolved mysteries in the academic world about the Valyrian freehold. But now Dr. Marwin can no longer care about deciphering the unclear text on this ancient book. He frowned and looked up at the scenery outside the Meester Tower. The sun was shining outside the window, the trees were shady, and the birds were chirping and jumping on the branches. It seems that I think too much. Dr. Marwin couldn't help laughing, then shook his head and said to himself, but this matter still needs to be reported to His Majesty. Then the short and sturdy Bullmeester stood up, holding the letter from the old town citadel in his hand, ready to find Viserys. On the other side, a farewell banquet was being held in the Red Castle. The protagonist of the banquet was Robb Stark, Viserys' squire. He had served and studied with Viserys for several years. Now he had grown up and should return to his hometown to take over the position of Lord of Winterfell and Governor of the North. The person acting as Governor of the North was still his father's old general, Lord Rickard Karstark, Earl of Carha. Robb was full of excitement about the future prospects. The young man had been in King's Landing for several years. During this period, he learned a lot of political intrigues and intrigues of the nobles in the capital. Robb felt that he had already graduated. Who said that the Stark family should not go south? Before this trip, Robb even looked forward to the moment when he would return to King's Landing in the future. He was not satisfied with being a governor of the North and Lord of Winterfell, because in Robb's view, this was what he deserved. The Stark family had been in charge of the North for generations, and as the eldest son of the family, everything his father had should be left to him in the end. Therefore, no one would cherish something that was easy to obtain. Robb wanted to fight with his own ability. He hoped that he would return to King's Landing as the Prime Minister one day in the future. However, before he left King's Landing, there was a person who made him reluctant to leave, and even couldn't help but dream about her. That was Miss Margaery of the Rose family in Star Shuttle City. Since the glimpse a few years ago, Robb, a rough-tempered northern teenager, has been deeply infatuated with Margaery Tyrell, a delicate and elegant southern girl. Margaery has a beautiful face, born very beautiful soft brown curly hair, watery brown eyes like a doe, and beautiful lines and figure. And the most important thing is that Margaery is very smart and clever. She has been taught by her grandmother Lady Olenna Redwyne since she was a child. Although she has just come of age like Robb, she can already flexibly deal with the noble circle of King's Landing. Robb is like a clumsy and shy brown bear in front of her. Margaery made Robb deeply infatuated with herself. However, Sansa, who is also a beautiful girl, saw all this. Women understand women best, especially beautiful women. Sansa couldn't help but remind her brother not to be led by the other party and should take the initiative. However, Robb didn't listen to Sansa's words. Robb was drunk at the farewell banquet, and his good brother Gendry also accompanied him to drink. There were no important people at the banquet. They were all friends Robb made in King's Landing over the years, and many of them were even half-grown children. Viserys did not attend the party of Robb and his little brothers, and Margaery, the object of Robb's secret love, did not come. Perhaps this is a reason why Robb drank a little too much today. He couldn't understand why he didn't impress her with his sincere heart. As the youngest governor of the North, the Lord of Winterfell, and a member of the Stark family, although the Tyrell family also has a deep foundation, isn't the marriage between nobles like this? Is there anyone who is better than himself? Robb has grown up, and his mother has mentioned in many letters from Winterfell that he might have to choose an excellent northern girl when he returns to the North. However, after living in King's Landing for so many years, he has seen the colorful world and the gentle southern girls. Robb may have looked down on the girls from his hometown. Darn, the reddish brown-haired boy drank the last glass of wine, and then his brain was dizzy. Then he threw the glass aside, lay on the table and fell asleep. Chapter 770 Lover. Robb and his companions were drunk, and in Meagher's holdfast in the Red Keep, Miss Margaery Tyrell, the little rose that Robb had been dreaming about, was here at the moment. As the most orthodox palace in the Empire, the Red Keep has several large and small gathering halls, and many people can enter and exit the area outside the Red Keep freely. In the center of the Red Keep, Meagher's holdfast is the royal bedroom. It is a huge square fortress with 12-foot thick walls and a dry moat covered with iron spikes. Miga's holdfast is heavily guarded, with a sentry every 5 steps and a sentry every 10 steps. Outsiders are strictly prohibited from entering and exiting to prevent assassins from sneaking in. And now, a naked girl wearing gorgeous silk is lying on a soft velvet bed with her white and tender feet. This is the Emperor's bedroom and Miga's holdfast in the Red Keep. The girl lying on the bed, that belonged to the Emperor and Queen of the Empire, had smooth brown curly hair draped over her smooth shoulders, a pair of big watery eyes, and 2 white arms supporting the bed. The golden silk covered some of the girl's key parts, but it highlighted her graceful curves and exquisite figure. She was the girl that Rob had been dreaming about, Lady Marguerite Tyrrell, known as the Little Rose. She lay naked on the messy bed, the white curtains fluttering gently in the wind, the sunlight outside the window just sprinkled on her calves and cute little feet, and then she stretched lazily, like a kitten in the afternoon sun. Then Marguerite's pair of crystal clear and watery eyes blinked slightly, and her eyes fell affectionately on Viserys, who was wearing a loose pajamas and had disheveled hair. Viserys was sitting at a desk at the side, flipping through a book to kill time in his spare time. The Supreme Emperor of the Empire now has long silver gold hair freely draped over his shoulders. His strong chest can be seen vaguely in his loose pajamas, and there is a faint red scratch on his chest. This is probably because he was just scratched by a conquered kitten in an unconscious state that has achieved the unity of man and nature claimed by the Church of the Red God. That is, he can communicate with the gods. Marguerite is one of Viserys' secret lovers, and the two have maintained such a relationship for more than a year. The Targaryen royal family collectively moved from the Red Keep to Highgarden, and the Red Keep was vacant. When Viserys returned to the Red Keep, Marguerite would secretly come to the Red Keep from the tunnel under the arrangement of the Ministry of Internal Affairs agents, to accompany His Majesty the Emperor. Because of the excellent cleanup work of the Ministry of Internal Affairs agents, no one in the outside world knew that Miss Marguerite of the Tyrrell family had been maintaining an improper relationship with His Majesty the Emperor. Even Robb Stark, Viserys' personal attendant, was unaware of this. Viserys had kindly reminded Robb that Marguerite was not suitable for him, and that he should marry a northern girl, but Robb did not listen either. The young man, who was deeply trapped in the whirlpool of love, had just passed his coming-of-age ceremony, and did not know the dangers of the adult world. I think you should talk to His Majesty. There is a saying that rabbits don't like to eat the grass next to their nests. Why? Why? The girl with dark skin, golden eyes, and gold-rimmed glasses scratched her head slightly. I'm not sure. Maybe if the grass next to the nest is eaten up, it's not easy to hide your nest. These are the conversations between Daenerys and her best friend Missandei from the island of Narth. The young girl who was just beginning to fall in love could not hide things in her heart. Although she didn't really want to tell Missandei about her worries, the girl with the high IQ still discovered them herself. Finally, Daenerys was forced to speak out all her worries, hoping that her good friend could give her some advice. Although Missandei had good grades and a high IQ, she had never experienced such a thing before, and was dumbfounded. However, Missandei of Narth Island had read many books in the academy, and had a lot of knowledge. After scratching her head for a long time, she finally gave Daenerys an idea, that is to talk to His Majesty in person, using her rabbit theory. Maybe it was because they were too familiar with each other, so it was difficult to start. At this moment, Daenerys listened to Missandei's advice, and then she mustered up the courage to fly to King's Landing on her dragon Viserion to talk to her brother in person. Highgarden is not far from King's Landing. It takes about half a day to fly there by dragon, so Viserys often travels between Highgarden and King's Landing. Your Highness. Your Highness. The silver waist-length hair girl rode her silver pony into the Red Keep, and the unsullied soldiers stationed in front of the gate naturally did not stop her. Your Highness. Daenerys got off the horse after entering the Red Keep, and then a golden-haired attendant came forward and took the reins from her hand, preparing to lead the horse into the stable of the Red Keep. The golden-haired attendant lowered his head and took the reins, as if he didn't want Daenerys to see his face. However, she still saw it. You are. Daenerys looked at the familiar face in front of her and was slightly stunned. Although she didn't remember it very clearly, she still recognized the identity of the person in front of her. The attendant was tall, but looked a little thin, because he was too thin. He had golden hair and a handsome face, but because he shrunk his neck and lowered his head, he looked a little timid, which destroyed his overall temperament. He looked like a horseboy. "You are that Prince Joffrey?" Daenerys recognized the other person's identity. He was the boy who bullied her and Missandei when they were young, but was taught a lesson by Gendry. It is said that the other person was once a prince, the son of the king who usurped her father's throne, but later it was heard that there was a reversal. Joffrey was not Robert's son, but the illegitimate son of the former queen and his brother. "Joffrey Water, your highness. I'm Joffrey Water." The blonde stable boy trembled slightly when he heard Daenerys' words, and then hurriedly explained with a little excitement. He was a head taller than Daenerys, but he was timid. Daenerys could even see deep fear and escape in his eyes. He was so scared of his former identity that he desperately hoped that he and everyone around him could forget it. Unfortunately, Joffrey could make himself forget, but he couldn't make others forget. Every time someone mentioned it, whether it was good or bad, it was a huge trauma to him, and it became a demon in his heart. Chapter 771 Acting Minister of Finance. "Goodbye, Princess. I will leave first." Then Joffrey, dressed as a stable boy, pulled Daenerys' mount and fled back to his own territory in a panic. It was a stable next to the Red Castle. The silver-haired girl looked at Joffrey's dodging back, opened her mouth slightly, and remained silent for a long time, but for some reason she didn't feel the pleasure of the bad guy being punished. Instead, she felt an inexplicable depression in her heart. After all, Daenerys was a kind-hearted girl. She would not hate Joffrey because of a fight between children when they were young. Fate is unpredictable, and things in the world are unpredictable. Then Daenerys clenched her fist slightly and then stopped thinking about it. She turned her head and looked at Migos holdfast in the Red Keep. She took a deep breath and thought about what Missandei told her. She straightened her chest and head and walked over to that side. "Your Majesty, will my brother become the Prime Minister?" In Migos holdfast, Margaery lazily lay on the big bed after a fierce battle, looking at Viserys with a pair of eyes as bright as a doe, and then asked. Margaery's brother Willis Tyrell has been transferred from Gulltown to King's Landing for a month. It took another month to finish his work in Gulltown, make the handover, and travel. Willis is diligent in his work, and his attitude and ability have no flaws. Now he has no arrangements in King's Landing for the time being. He still lives in the property purchased by the Tyrell family in King's Landing, living with his sister Lady Margaery. However, there are already some rumors that Willis will replace the seriously ill Westerland Governor Misthoin as the next Prime Minister. Therefore, Willis has become a hot commodity now, and has been courted by the powerful and influential people in the King's Landing. Even several ministers came to visit, including the Minister of Agriculture Alistair Florent, who is a fellow villager, Prince Oberyn Martell, the Minister of Justice, and Illyrio, the former boss and the Minister of Finance. Everyone has heard that Illyrio, the Minister of Finance, has not been very happy recently because he broke his leg while riding a horse and even lost dozens of pounds, and the whole person seemed to have taken off a layer of skin. However, Illyrio's difficulties are only known to himself, and he has to swallow his broken teeth and swallow his stomach, and he can't say his bitterness. According to the news revealed by the servants around Illyrio, Governor Indolus is preparing to pack up and return to his fiefdom to rest recently, and he has also asked for sick leave from His Majesty the Emperor. Margaery asked Viserys at this moment to satisfy her inner curiosity and also to explore the bottom for her brother. After all, Willis doesn't know his future arrangements now. Viserys was flipping through a biography novel in his hand, and then he heard his lover's question, slightly closed the book in his hand and said, "I will serve as the acting finance minister for the time being." Misthoin's health was not very good, and Viserys had visited him several times, but he recovered a little under the care of Dr. Ambrose. If Misthoin wanted to resign, Viserys would promise him to return home, but he did not seem to want to leave the power center of the empire so early, and was still struggling to death. And Viserys would naturally not force it. After all, Misthoin was a founding elder who had made great contributions to him, although his working ability has declined significantly due to physical reasons. Willis Tyrell was born in a family that was defeated at the time. Before the Second Conquest War, the Tyrrell family did not recognize the general trend and chose to surrender, but was actively preparing for war to resist the unification of the country. Therefore, on the battlefield of the River Each, the army of the Targaryen family gave the Tyrrell family a thundering blow, and the roses in Highgarden withered. Willis is indeed a capable and talented young man, but the Toyne family was the founding hero of the Targaryen family. If the empire wants to develop better and last longer, it must be fair. After all, more than half of the families and population in Westeros opposed the Targaryen family. Should they abandon this half of the people after unification? However, if the country wants to develop better, it needs to rely on the joint efforts of the other half of the people. But the soldiers who are the founding heroes still need to be treated preferentially, otherwise the hearts of the meritorious people will be chilled. Therefore, how to balance this bowl of water, and how to maintain the delicate balance have become what the Emperor should do. This is Viserys' job, not just a problem for Willis and Miss Toyne. Minister of Finance. The lazy cat lying on the bed on the other side heard Viserys' words, and blinked his beautiful eyes slightly. It seems to be suitable for Willis. Willis likes arithmetic. He studied mathematics when he was in the Citadel. Marguerite remembered the days when her elder brother Willis was studying in the Citadel. He especially liked to study numbers. Willis even told Marguerite that numbers were the most romantic symbols in the world, and they contained endless truths. However, Willis' passionate speech only caused his little sister to roll her eyes. By the way, at this time, Marguerite seemed to think of something. Your Majesty, Rob also invited me to attend a banquet today. Are you going to let him go back to the north? The brown-haired beauty asked curiously. Then she pulled the silk covering her body, wrapped her flawless body, and only half of her breasts were exposed. She jumped off the bed and raised her hand to put her long hair behind her ears. Then Marguerite walked towards Viserys and sat on him directly. Viserys looked at Marguerite Tyrrell, who was sitting close to him, and sniffed her seductive body fragrance. Although he had done it once not long ago, he couldn't help but feel a little hot in his heart again. But I refused. The girl's fingers passed through Viserys' pajamas and made circles on his chest. Marguerite smiled and asked for credit. There was a shy blush on her pretty face. She kissed Viserys' chest gently and then raised her head. How should you reward me? Marguerite was indeed an attractive little elf. Her actions and words completely ignited the fire in Viserys' body. Take off your clothes yourself. Viserys took a deep breath and then spoke. This is your order, Your Majesty. Marguerite smiled charmingly and whispered in Viserys' ear, her voice rustling and crisp. The golden silk slid to the ground. Chapter 772 Quarrel. The Emperor's bedroom was abuzz with excitement, but the quiet corridors of Migos Holdfast were deserted. Every time Marguerite was secretly brought from the tunnel under the Red Keep, the Ministry of Internal Affairs would clear Migos Holdfast in advance and prohibit any servants and maids from entering. Because of this, the fact that the Emperor of the Empire had several lovers had never been noticed by the outside world. However, now, a woman's faint scream could be heard in the quiet corridor, and she seemed to be in high spirits. Daenerys clenched her fist slightly, her throat was a little dry, and her heartbeat accelerated. She was not an unworldly girl, and Daenerys also knew what this voice meant. However, now that Arianne and Rhaenys were both in Highgarden, who could this woman be? Daenerys was a little nervous, and her heartbeat kept accelerating. However, as her footsteps continued to move forward, the sound surrounding the quiet corridor became louder and louder, but there was also a ball of anger burning in her chest. You are the one who should be the queen of Little Viserys, Your Highness. Because your bloodline is a purist, and you are also very beautiful, His Majesty will definitely like you. The old maid Sophia, who once served Viserys' mother, was old enough to be the grandmother of Viserys and Daenerys. She watched King Aerys and Queen Rhaella grow up, and also delivered Viserys and Daenerys. Therefore, the old maid is now one of the few people in the world who can call Viserys like this, and he dare not get angry. The old maid braided Daenerys' hair, and then talked in a nagging manner. She was old, and became a little long-winded, and sometimes she would lose consciousness for a short time, and forget what she had just done. But this voice still seems to linger in her ears. At that time, Daenerys was not only shy, but also had a little happiness in her heart that was not known to outsiders. We are all waiting to drink your wedding wine, Your Highness. Even the blacksmith on her fiefdom Dragonstone Island carried a hammer and said this to her. Everyone thought that Daenerys would marry Viserys sooner or later. It was just a matter of time. After all, Daenerys had not yet held her coming of age ceremony. And she thought so too. She had already considered herself one of Viserys' wives, just waiting for him to marry her. But only Viserys had not expressed his opinion. Perhaps it was really the rabbit theory as Miss Andrew said, or there might be other reasons. But this still could not calm the rage burning in Daenerys' heart at the moment. I should be Viserys' queen. The girl with silver golden hair bit her lip slightly and clenched her fists. Irian, Rhaenys, they are actually not qualified. Then she strode towards the direction where the voice came from, the upper meager tower of the Red Keep, which was the Emperor's bedroom. But at this moment, a figure flashed out from the shadow of the corridor. Your Highness. He was wearing a black robe and a mask on his face, and warned in a low and hoarse voice. Your Highness, you can't go any further. Get out of the way. How dare you stop me? But Daenerys was furious at the moment, and she ignored him, and walked past him with big strides. The agent of the Ministry of Internal Affairs trembled slightly, took a deep breath, and finally did not dare to forcibly stop the princess. Oh no, but he was still able to realize that something was wrong, and turned his head to look at Daenerys' back. Something is going to happen. Go and inform the adults. Although Daenerys looked weak on the outside, she was actually very strong, especially when she was determined to do something. No one could pull her back. The agent of the Ministry of Internal Affairs did not dare to forcibly stop the princess from moving forward, otherwise no one would stand up for him, even if he was killed, and Daenerys walked quickly towards Viserys' room. Meager's tower is a square fortress with a garden in the middle of the castle. The balcony of the Emperor's bedroom can be seen directly from the other side of the corridor, but there are often white curtains here. Viserys. However, now, those increasingly urgent voices came from here. The sea breeze over the narrow sea blew, and the white curtains fluttered. Daenerys stopped in the corridor, and could see Viserys' room. She saw a girl of the same age and good looks kneeling on a soft feather bed. Her graceful curves were exposed, and her brown curly hair just covered her smooth shoulders. It's her. Marguerite Tyrell. Daenerys recognized the girl who was now in Viserys' room at a glance. She was the lady of the Tyrell family who often appeared in front of Viserys intentionally or unintentionally. Marguerite was 1 year older than Daenerys. Because she was sent to King's Landing very early, the two girls were good friends who talked about everything when they were young. However, Daenerys' pure mind was naturally incomparable to Marguerite, and Daenerys always felt that Marguerite seemed to be using her for something. Moreover, this little Rose who had been stunning since childhood often secretly asked Daenerys about his brother, which aroused Daenerys' disgust. Therefore, the two former good friends gradually became estranged. However, Daenerys did not expect that the girl who climbed into her brother's bed was the lady of the Tyrell family, her former friend. She had been scheming for this, but she succeeded in the end. Princess Daenerys caught the Emperor and Miss Marguerite Tyrell's affair. This matter was quickly transmitted to Ramsay Bolton, the commander of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, through the operation of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Ramsay's face suddenly changed after hearing about this. You bunch of rubbish. Why didn't you stop the princess? According to the Ministry of Internal Affairs agent who was responsible for taking Miss Marguerite Tyrell into the Red Castle through the secret passage, Princess Daenerys broke into Meager's holdfast directly, and the Emperor and Miss Marguerite were staying in the room. Although His Majesty had noticed something in advance, he was still a step late, and was caught by Her Royal Highness the Princess. Daenerys was furious, and had a quarrel with Viserys. Then she left on the dragon in a huff, and she flew eastward, probably to her fiefdom Dragonstone. My lord, His Majesty has urgently summoned you. However, at this moment, an agent from the Ministry of Internal Affairs came to report. Snap, Ramsay smashed the cup in his hand upon hearing it, and there was a sharp pain in the palm of his hand, and blood dripped down. Apparently the skin was cut by the fragments of the cup. Let's go. Ramsay's face was at hen, and then he flicked his robe sleeves and strode out. The base of the Ministry of Internal Affairs is located in the basement of King's Landing. However, when Ramsay walked outside, he found that the sky was clear just now, but it darkened in almost an instant, and the wind and clouds suddenly changed. What's going on? Why did the sky suddenly turn dark? Many local people and merchants in King's Landing were also confused, so they raised their heads and looked at the sky. Then I saw that the sun, which had just been shining brightly above my head, seemed to be being eaten bit by something. Chapter 773 Solar Eclipse. In the Red Keep, the Grand Maester Marwyn, holding a letter from the Citadel, walked down from the Maester's tower and walked quickly towards Mega's tower. He heard that Princess Daenerys and His Majesty seemed to have had a quarrel just now, and then left in a huff, but no one knew the specific reason, because Mega's tower had been cleared out at that time. Little Dany actually lost her temper? Marwyn couldn't help but laugh when he heard about it. He was invited by Viserys to become the Imperial Master, and one of the Grand Maester's duties was to be responsible for the education of royal family members. He was once Daenerys' teacher and knew that this girl looked weak on the surface, but in fact her temper and character were stronger than anyone else. But Daenerys was very dependent on His Majesty, so how could she suddenly quarrel with His Majesty? Maester Bull shook his head, but he had no time to think about the business, and he had to inform His Majesty the Emperor about the disorder of the stars. According to the observation of the Citadel, there have been many abnormal phenomena in the stars recently, and there may be changes that subvert the world. However, just as Dr. Marwyn was about to take another step towards Mega's holdfast, he suddenly felt the sunlight around him dim slightly. Dr. Marwyn was stunned for a moment, and then he heard the exclamations of the court maids around him. Look up at the sky. Dr. Marwyn hurriedly raised his head and looked at the sky, and the court maids, servants, stable boys in the Red Keep and even the unsullied soldiers on duty couldn't help but raise their heads and look at the sky of King's Landing. Above their heads was the blue sky in the afternoon, but the sun seemed to have been bitten by a dog, with a dark and deep gap, which was why the sunlight on the ground suddenly faded a lot. What happened? What's going on? The sun suddenly disappeared a small piece, and King's Landing was in a panic. The capital garrison was maintaining order, and the Red Keep was no exception. These courtmaids were not necessarily more knowledgeable than the civilians outside, and they were also shouting when they were frightened. Even the unsullied soldiers who remained calm in the face of the enemy could not help but breathe rapidly and clenched their shields and spears. Because the unknown is the greatest fear for humans. Humans are afraid of ghosts mostly because ghosts cannot be seen. If ghosts can be seen and hit, perhaps they will not be so scary. This is the short and fat Dr. Marwyn stood in front of Mega's tower, holding the letter from the Citadel tightly in his hand. He looked up at the sky and felt a bone-chilling coldness in his heart. Because the sun is disappearing. Why? What would happen if the sun disappeared completely? Dr. Marwyn thought of this and lowered his head slightly to look at the letter in his hand, his face a little ugly. And upstairs in Mega's tower in the Red Keep, Viserys had already put on his clothes, and so did his little lover, Lady Margaery of the Tyrell family. She wrapped her bra again, put on the white socks on her legs, put on her skirt, and sat quietly by the bed. Just now, Daenerys came in and had a quarrel with Viserys, which made Margaery feel a little embarrassed and ashamed. After all, Little Rose was not as sophisticated as the Queen of Thorns, especially the brother who cheated on her childhood friend. However, the core issue raised by Daenerys was not about Viserys and Margaery, but about the continuation of the family bloodline. Daenerys believed that she was the best candidate for queen, which was what she had always kept in her heart. The union of Viserys and Aerion was the product of a political marriage, and the Targaryen blood in Rhaenys was not pure. She gave birth to her eldest son for Viserys who had no Targaryen blood characteristics. Daenerys felt that she could only fulfill the mission of family continuation by marrying Viserys. This was her responsibility and obligation, but Viserys was somewhat unable to accept Daenerys' ideas, and felt that she was a little paranoid. Therefore, the two finally parted unhappily. Daenerys flew to Dragonstone on a dragon in a fit of anger, and Viserys was also a little upset. Daenerys has flaws in her character, which may not be known to outsiders, but Viserys knows it well. After all, she is the daughter of the Mad King, and her mother, Queen Rhaela, had taken a lot of hallucinogens before giving birth to her, which indirectly led to her mother's death during childbirth. Viserys is most worried about whether these will have an impact on Daenerys, but fortunately, he has not detected the crazy gene in Daenerys over the years. but her character is indeed a little paranoid, easy to be confused about things, easy to go to extremes, belonging to the idea of good and evil. Danny, the brown curly-haired girl looked a little uneasy and asked in a low voice. She didn't know where Daenerys went after the quarrel. I'll take care of Danny's affairs. However, Viserys shook his head and said, Marguerite, you go back first. Come on. Bring Miss Tyrell back. Viserys spoke directly, without any room for maneuver in his voice. As soon as he finished speaking, the bedroom door opened, and 2 masked internal affairs agents stood outside the door waiting to send her away. Marguerite Tyrell had no choice but to bow slightly and then leave. Yes, your majesty. Then the internal affairs agents sent Marguerite away and went straight to the outside world from the tunnel of the Red Castle. Viserys sat alone in the room and felt a little headache because of the paranoid nature hidden in Daenerys' character. It's really troublesome. It's not difficult to marry Daenerys directly, but the defects in her character cannot be made up. Now it may still be a fight for favor, but later it may involve the dispute of Viserys' heir. However, when Viserys was having a headache about whether to ride the dragon now and go to Dragonstone to find Daenerys, the sky above his head suddenly darkened. Like everyone else, the maids exclaimed outside, and Viserys' eyes also condensed slightly. Huh. Then he left his seat, walked quickly to the balcony, and looked up at the sky. There was a dark gap in the sun, as if it had been gnawed by a dog. Did the dog eat the moon? Oh, no, it was a dog that ate the Sunday. Is it a solar eclipse? The sea breeze above the narrow sea blew his hair. Viserys held onto the cold stone balcony, and the first thing he thought of was a solar eclipse. However, thinking carefully about the astrology that Viserys had learned about this world, it seemed that there had never been any record of a solar eclipse. Chapter 2. Wait a minute. Chapter 774. The long night arrives. This phenomenon of eclipse is not only happening in King's Landing, but also happening all over the world at the same time. The sun is being eaten away by darkness bit by bit, and the light shining on the ground is gradually decreasing. Where have people ever seen such a scene? So they can only panic and kneel down to pray. From the rebuilding north to dawn at the other end of the empire, from the lonely light island on the sunset sea to Pentus, Andalus and the kingdom of the 3 daughters on the other side of the narrow sea. The sun is being taken away. This carries the core of all human life and hope. However, everyone can only watch the sun disappear without any way to save it. Even the emperor of the Valyrian Empire, the most powerful country in the world today, just stood on the balcony and was helpless. The farmers in the fields, the boatmen in the port, and the soldiers who maintained order, all of them were at a loss. What happened? Daenerys, who had just had a quarrel with Viserys, was riding her dragon to Dragonstone, and the head that was still hot just now became much more sober after being blown by the sea breeze. She regretted quarreling with Viserys. She regretted even more that she had said something that could not be taken back during the quarrel. Because words are like sharp knives, especially for those close to her. Once they are said impulsively, it is hard to take them back. Even if relatives and friends can forgive, there will still be a knot in their hearts. Fortunately, she only said it in front of Viserys, and Rhaenys and Arianne did not know, but there was another woman at the scene at that time. Will Marguerite tell them what she said? Daenerys regretted her impulsiveness. She rode on the back of her partner Viserys' dragon. Below her was an endless narrow sea and white clouds. The silver-haired girl clenched her fist slightly, and the dragon under her seemed to feel the inner struggle of her master at the moment. Daenerys didn't want to fly back just like that, because of her face, and Viserys tilted his head slightly, glanced at Daenerys with a pair of platinum eyes, and let out a low roar, as if to encourage her. However, at this moment, the sky above her head suddenly dimmed. Everyone, does anyone know what happened? What should we do? On the other side, in Bravos, the current Bravos-seeking Tormo Frege stood in the Sea King's palace and asked the keykeeper of the Iron Vault. However, these people who claimed to be in charge of the most wealth in the world looked at each other and were speechless. Because at this time, facing this situation, wealth and gold coins have become worthless. Volantis, Bonero, the supreme priest of the Red God, led his followers to ignite a worldwide fire in the Red Temple that the whole of Volantis could see. Whoosh, the fire is burning, and the raging flames are rising into the sky. The ancient gods are gathering strength. That is an evil and powerful force that mortals cannot resist. And the cold wind has already blown, and soon there will be a long night that never ends, unless the upright people muster up the courage to uphold the faith of the flaming red heart. The high priest personally knelt in front of the flames and led the believers to pray loudly, praying that Allah would grant them the dawn and bring back the disappearing sun. And this is actually the content of the prayers that the red-robed monks perform every day. At dusk, they lit the flames and prayed to Allah that the sun would rise as usual the next day, but this time it was the largest prayer ceremony in history. Westothruki. Shek. Shek. The sun was disappearing, and the brave and fearless grassland knights on the battlefield were all panicked, kneeling in front of the mother mountain and constantly praying that the horse god would bless them. And outside the temple of Mengokal, the Kalamunkals who unified the Dothraki, a shadow binder wearing a red lacquer mask was looking up at the sky. Quay lizard. At this time, a voice came from behind the shadow binder, and the female shadow binder named Quay lizard turned around and looked at her companion. The two looked at each other with fear in their eyes. In the midst of the Valyrian ruins, there were dark clouds and thunder and lightning. The ships passing by heard bursts of terrifying sounds from inside, not knowing whether it was thunder or something else. You can even vaguely see a huge figure hovering in the distant sky. Slavers Bay, Astapa, Junfei, Meereen, Ivan, the Shadow Council, the Queen of the Summer Islands, Asha Greyjoy and her lovers also sat up in shock. All over the world, places where the sun's rays can reach have fallen into panic. In King's Landing, the sun had disappeared by half in just a moment. Come here. Tell Blackfish Brynden Tully to close all the gates of King's Landing. Maintain order in the capital. No chaos. In the Red Keep, Viserys had gradually recovered from his shock and then issued orders like water from the Red Keep. No matter what happened, the most urgent thing was to maintain stability. Now Viserys could imagine how chaotic the outside world would be without going out. He thought it was a solar eclipse at first, but until he thought about it carefully, he found that the humans in this world seemed to have no records of any solar eclipses. There is no solar eclipse in this world, or is the number of such phenomena too rare? However, combined with the unreasonable and chaotic seasonal changes in this world, a summer and a winter can last for several years, while spring and autumn often only last for a year. Viserys had reason to get a chilling answer. Could it be the long night has fallen? But in Viserys' memory, the year 299 of the Egan calendar should be the period when the War of the Five Kings was taking place. Winter may have quietly arrived, but there was no long night. Why did such a change happen? What are the laws governing the operation of this world? Are these the will of the gods? Or natural selection? Or the power of the magic tide? However, the chaotic rules of this world made Viserys confused. Your Majesty, something bad has happened. Then the Grand Maester Dr. Marwyn came hurriedly, holding the letter from the Citadel in his hand. However, the letter had lost its effect at this moment. The Maester speculated that the disorder of the stars might lead to natural disasters and man-made disasters. Drive Marwyn, do you know about the solar eclipse? Viserys, wearing a coat, saw Dr. Marwyn coming and asked directly. Sure enough, the knowledgeable Dr. Marwyn looked confused. It was obvious that he had never heard of the solar eclipse. Chapter 775, Blockade of King's Landing. Dang, dang, dang. Then the bells of the Cathedral of St. Bela began to ring, echoing throughout the entire King's Landing. This is the bell that only rings for weddings and funerals of important figures in the royal family and the empire. As the Archbishop of the Church of the Seven Gods, Egan, with a crystal crown on his head and a scepter in his hand, was a little confused at this time. He didn't know what he should do, but he was the Archbishop, and was regarded as the spokesperson of the gods in the mortal world. Now all the monks and monks in the cathedral have their eyes on him. Egan must do something at this time. Tell everyone, don't panic. The seven gods will protect everyone. Therefore, Egan could only speak with a rolling throat. He placed all his hopes on the gods in the sky. He ordered the ancient bells of the cathedral to be rung, hoping to awaken the gods' attention to the mortal world and find the lost son. On the streets of King's Landing, the bells of the Cathedral of St. Bela kept ringing. Some people heard the bells of the cathedral, and then, as if they had found hope, they knelt down and began to pray loudly. someone started to kneel down and pray for the other believers who believed in the 7 gods, because at this time they didn't know what they could do. They could only kneel down and pray, hoping that the 7 gods could bless them. "Come here. Your Majesty has an order. Close the city gates." On the other side, the commander-in-chief of the city guard, Sir Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, climbed onto the wall of the steel gate of King's Landing with his hand on the hilt of his sword, and then gave a stern order. He had received an order from the Red Castle. The Emperor of the Empire ordered him to send out all the soldiers of the city guard to maintain order in the capital and prevent all chaos and commotion. At the same time, the 7 gates of King's Landing were closed to prevent the people of the outer city from pouring into the inner city and impacting the security of King's Landing. Today, King's Landing has gradually formed an outer city area outside the city as the city's status has risen and the city's scale has expanded. "Close the gates. Close the gates." Brynden Tully's orders were passed down layer by layer. The soldiers of the Capitol Guard at the bottom held spears and shields and kept driving the people near the gates. At the same time, they pulled the hinges to close the gates, making a tooth-grinding metal friction sound. "Back off. Back off. Those who attack the gates will die." However, many people were already panicking. Some wanted to rush into the city, and some wanted to escape from the city. They didn't calm down until they saw the blood. Several young men who relied on their strong bodies tried to attack the formation of the Capitol Guard soldiers and snatch the weapons in their hands, but they were killed on the spot. Boom boom. Then all 7 gates of King's Landing were closed heavily with a roar. The sun disappeared completely. The whole world fell into a dim darkness, and the capital of the Valyrian Empire finally regained its calm under the suppression of the soldiers. All the people were ordered to return to their homes and close their doors. Soldiers were guarding the intersections of the streets, holding torches to dispel the darkness and bring a little light. However, although the soldiers of the Empire were strictly trained and still firmly followed the orders of their superiors to suppress all resistance and riots, their faces were also full of confusion because they didn't know what happened. The sun had disappeared for several hours, but there was no sign of returning. Is the end of the world coming? Everyone was worried and even asked themselves this question. However, no one had an answer, and they didn't even know whether it was just happening here or the whole world. But fortunately, there are still tall people to support the sky when it falls. Especially the soldiers who had participated in the war between humans and White Walkers and survived thought so. He will never forget that scene. A man and a dragon swooping down alone to the back of the army of the dead. "Your Majesty." An officer who was missing a hand in the capital garrison pursed his lips slightly, then turned his head with a fanatical look, looking at the red keep on Egan's Hill in the distance, where the lights were still bright. He believed that, even if it was the end of the world, His Majesty the Emperor would become the only light for all mankind, lead the whole world out of this crisis. It was obvious that Viserys' few powers of faith were contributed by the soldiers he had conquered. In the Red Keep, Viserys was still wearing his pajamas, with a simple coat on the outside, walking around the room. He didn't even have time to tidy up the feather bed that he and Marguerite Tyrell had messed up. He stood in his bedroom, with the Valyrian steel crown on his head, and his sword dusk hanging on the wall not far away, then turned around and said, "So, the situation now is, has the long night really come?" Viserys' important ministers of the Royal Council have now gathered in his bedroom. Outside, the throne room of the Red Keep is now also crowded with people, mostly nobles and their families seeking refuge. When a crisis occurs, the first thing these people think of is to run to the Red Keep for refuge. There is nowhere to go outside. Now the sky and the earth are dim and there is no sun or moon. They dare not go out of the city. At least they have so many people to accompany them in the city. After all, people are social animals. The more people there are, the safer they feel. And where is the safest place in King's Landing? There is no doubt that it is the Red Keep. The place where His Majesty the Supreme Emperor of the Empire lives must be impregnable. However, Viserys did not have time to go to the throne room to comfort the frightened nobles at this moment, so he summoned all the important officials of the Royal Council in his bedroom, including the seriously ill Prime Minister, Miss Toyne, and Willis Tyrell, who had not yet taken over as acting Chancellor of the Exchequer, also came. When the sun gradually disappeared, Willis was still looking for his sister in a hurry. Because King's Landing was in turmoil, he was afraid that his sister would be in danger, but he didn't expect that the agents of the Ministry of Internal Affairs would escort Margarita all back. However, Willis was standing here and had no idea that his sister had just fought with the Emperor for 300 rounds on the bed next to him. Willis's old boss Illyrio Mopatis did not come here because unfortunately, the governor of Andalus had left by boat yesterday. Now he may be drifting on the dark sea. Can you confirm it? The Emperor of the Empire was wearing pajamas and a coat, with a solemn face. There is no concrete evidence, Your Majesty. On the other side, Dr. Marwin, the Grand Secretary of the court, sat in the Emperor's chair with a haggard face. He kept flipping through the books and shook his head and spoke. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.